Chapter 593. A few days ago on the island, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had told Qin Changsheng that if he wanted to delay the eruption of his internal injuries, then he should not continue cultivating. He didn't expect that Qin Changsheng not only didn't listen to him, but also advanced even more fiercely. In such a short period of time, Qin Changsheng was ready to break through to the next stage. He could not help but feel anxious and worried, but it was already too late. The lake breeze lightly fluttered his Taoist robe. Qin Changsheng's eyes were closed. He was no longer in this world. His consciousness returned to the most primitive place, that tranquil and profound sea of consciousness. With a slight thought, his sea of consciousness naturally produced waves that set off unimaginably huge waves. These waves were as tall as a 10-story building, and their momentum was extremely astonishing. They constantly pierced towards the gloomy sky above the sea. However, the sky was too high. No matter how high the waves were, they could not reach it. When they reached the peak, they would fall back down helplessly, smashing countless fine white foam on the surface of the sea. If the waves were not separated from the seawater, they would not be able to soar into the sky. If it was in the past, it would not be difficult for him to send a wisp of his divine sense into the sky, but today he needed to send more of his divine sense there. Therefore he willed it again, turning it into countless sharp weapons, swords, sabers, and then Sever thought. Above his sea of consciousness, a storm raged. Countless howling winds and torrential rain came from the horizon, transforming into countless seemingly real moves, slashing towards the surging waves. Orthodox Academy's true sword, Mount Li's Mountain Gate sword, 3 songs of the fisherman, 3 swords of Wen Shui, Snow Mountain Sect's frozen frost sword, Star Caesar Academy's army vanquishing sword, Heavenly Tao Academy's sword of hithering light, South Stream Temple's 3 lanes of plum blossom, countless sword techniques appeared in the storm and danced wildly on the surface of the sea. The 10-story tall waves were shaken by the slash and gradually separated from the surface of the sea. However, there was still a deep connection that could not be completely severed. An extremely resolute shout rang out from the surface of the sea. Then, a saber intent descended from the sky, having blade technique, first form, origin. This was the most powerful saber technique in the world. Before the saber, everything would be cut in half. The huge wave finally broke off from the surface of the sea and floated up. When the huge waves left the surface of the sea, they turned into pure water, looking just like the lake outside the ethereal palace. Having lost its connection with the sea of consciousness, the seawater seemed to have lost all weight. It gently drifted towards the gloomy sky, drifting higher and higher, further and further away. Finally, it followed a passage that it had not truly passed through for a long time, but was actually strengthening every day, and arrived at the sea of stars in the deepest part of the sky. This sea water was the essence of his soul consciousness, the essence of his experience, and the most precious thing to him. When he arrived at the starry sea, his divine sense did not stop. It continued to move forward at a seemingly slow pace, but in reality it was extremely fast. After a long time, he finally arrived at the edge of the starry sea. This place was extremely far away from the earth. It was already on the other side of the sea of stars. There was nothingness outside the sea of stars. But what about beyond the nothingness? Qin Changsheng looked into the incomparably distant distance and felt that there were still countless stars there. Back in the library of the Orthodox Academy, on that night when he ignited his faded star, he had this sort of feeling. It was like he was looking at the lights of 10,000 houses. Unfortunately, the other side was too far away. With the strength and density of his current divine sense, no matter what, he could not reach there. He could not explore the true edge of the world. He retracted his gaze and looked towards an inconspicuous corner at the edge of the sea of stars. There was an inconspicuous star there. It was very small, very red, and looked like an apple. This was his faded star. His divine sense slowly approached it. The sea water fell on the little red star. Not only did it not lower the temperature of the star and extinguish the flames, but it also made the red flames on the surface of the star even more violent. The golden wind and jade met and turned into countless molten magma, spraying countless starlight into the pitch-black space. Almost surpassing the limits of time and space, the incalculable amount of starlight from the extremely distant edge of the sea of stars returned to the earth and poured into his body. There was a loud bang. Chun Chong-sheng, who was sitting cross-legged, suddenly sunk half a foot into the ground. That was because the ground within a radius of 3 zhang under his body had sunk. The lake wind howled and swirled around his body, causing his Taoist robe to flap. The wind poured into his sword sheath, causing it to hum, seeming extremely wild and excited. Dust flew everywhere, rising into the heavens. It was as if black smoke had dimmed the bright sun by quite a bit. Someone inadvertently looked towards the sky and saw that in the gloomy sky, in a position relative to the sun, there was a faint of light that seemed like a star in the night sky. The problem was, it was still daytime, so how could one see a star? How could there be such a bright star in the world? That person shook his head, driving this absurd thought out of his mind, and once again looked towards the scene. At this time, only the Elder of Heavenly Secrets was not looking at the cross-legged Qin Chongsheng, but at the sky, and only he could be sure that in the gloomy sky a star had truly appeared. The sea of stars contained an inexplicable fate. Even he could not determine the position of that star, but he knew why that star had appeared. On this ordinary day at the end of summer, the midday sun was still blazing fiercely. Who would notice that fleeting star? Even if they noticed it, who would dare believe their own eyes? In a mountain field on the outskirts of the capital, the Pope stood in front of Archbishop Melish's grave, gazing at the name of his old friend on the gravestone. His eyes were tinged with worry as he said, "Back then we were worried that he would mature too quickly, but now it seems that this worry was reasonable." On the highest dew platform in the capital, the divine empress held her hands behind her back and gazed at a certain place in the sky. The sunlight was very dazzling, but she did not even blink. Ever since many years ago, when Emperor Taizong had driven her out of the imperial palace and demoted her to the 100 Herb Garden, she no longer feared looking directly at the sun. Today, she was also not looking at the sun. Behind her, Mou gazed at her back, somewhat uneasily thinking, just what did the Empress see that made her remain silent for so long? In the most majestic and imposing palace hall of Shuala City, the demon lord sat on a chair, silently listening to his most loyal subordinate report on the recent strange movements of the demon commander and the conflicts between the nobles and military advisor Black Robe's faction. He was still the middle-aged scholar he had been in Mount Han, but his face was much paler and the mountains and rivers he had seen were already in ruins. He somewhat wearily waved his hand for that subordinate to scram. Suddenly he sensed something and raised his head to glance at the top of the palace. After a moment of silence, he stood up and walked to a green plant. This was a persimmon tree he had brought back from the stream in Mount Han. He gazed at the heavy persimmons on the treetop and frowned. It's actually going to ripen so quickly. Chapter 594. Taoist Ji and Yuan walked through the plains. They did not walk on the official road, did not take a boat to cross the Luo River. They only walked in the places with the least people, the places where the weeds were the thickest. Their Taoist robes were covered in bits of grass, and beneath their walking sticks was a crushed praying mantis. Because he was not good at walking, Yuan walked very slowly. Taoist Ji had to take care of his disciple's speed, so he naturally could not go too fast. Yet they had clearly been in the snowy plains to the north of Mount Han a few days ago. So why were they here in the plains where they could see that mighty city? That city had no walls, but on a day like today when the sky was as blue as if it had been washed, it could be seen from several dozen li away. This was because within the city was a high platform, and outside the city was a high hill, as well as countless buildings that towered into the clouds. Returning to this place after so many years, Taoist Ji's face showed no emotion. It was still calm and indifferent, perhaps numb. Yurin had no impression of the capital, nor did he have any feelings, but his face still revealed some curiosity and yearning. But in the next moment, those emotions on his face transformed into solemnity and unease. He gazed at a certain place in the blue sky for a very long time. The stifling wind of the plains ruffled the black hair on his forehead. He only had one eye that could see, so staring into the distance like this was very easy to make him feel sore. He rubbed his eyes and couldn't help but wonder if his eyes were playing tricks on him earlier. You didn't see wrong. That is your junior brother's faded star. At some point, Taoist Ji had also gazed up at the sky. An extremely faint smile finally appeared on his usually calm and emotionless face. Although the smile was faint, it concealed a very strong emotion. Too many years had passed, and he had almost forgotten which direction the wind was blowing in the Palace of Great Clarity when Emperor Taizong said those words to him before returning to the Sea of Stars. Hearing Taoist Ji's words, Yurin became even more uneasy. There's no need to worry, this is a good thing. After saying this, Taoist Ji continued forward. Yurin looked at his back and opened his mouth to shout something, but no sound came out. He gestured with his hands, but he could not be seen. He could only shake his head and follow. The wind rustled the weeds on the plains, parting them to form a path. Master and disciple walked along the path in the wild grass. One was happy, the other worried. At the end of this path, the capital loomed. At the peak of Mount Han, by the lakeside of the Heaven Lake, many people had already guessed what Chen Chongqing was doing or what he was experiencing. Countless shocked discussions sounded, turning into a buzzing sound like that of a swarm of wild bees. Then it disappeared in an extremely short period of time, becoming absolutely still. Looking at Chen Chongsheng, who was sitting cross-legged, everyone's faces were filled with shock. He was at star condensation. During the grand examination, Chen Chongqing had broken through to ethereal opening on the spot. Could it be that today he would also break into star condensation? This genius of the orthodoxy, who had already created far too many miracles, was he going to shock the entire continent once more? Could he succeed? Choosing to break through at such a time was shocking enough in itself. But the real key to this matter was still whether he could do it in the end. If he could, it would be a miracle. If not, it would be a joke. Moreover, just being able to do it wasn't enough. What was star condensation? If those who did not understand cultivation had read a few related books, they would perhaps believe that star condensation was a higher level of purification, that one could borrow the radiance of the myriad stars bestowed by the Sea of Stars in the instant of breaking into star condensation and directly raise the strength of the body to an unimaginable level. This view was not completely without reason. Even if human star condensation experts did not condense a star domain, they would still be able to directly battle against demon experts in terms of physical strength and strength. But the true crux of star condensation lay in the 4 words condensing a star domain. Cultivators borrowed the frenzied radiance of the stars to directly open up the many meridians and circulations in their body, doing their utmost to light up more than 300 chi openings. From then on, they would possess an unending stream of true essence that, under normal circumstances, could be called inexhaustible. The radiance of the stars would manifest, forming a world of its own. Only at this moment could one be said to have entered the ranks of true experts. The problem was how to distribute the amount of star radiance, how to choose the order and number of chi openings to light up. This was an extremely complicated problem. Even disciples of great sects with extremely deep resources had to undergo a long period of preparation with the help of their teachers before breaking into star condensation. If they were even the slightest bit careless, there was a high chance that they would fail in breaking into star condensation. There was even a chance that the star radiance would reverse, causing the cultivator to be heavily injured and their cultivation to greatly decrease. They might even lose all hope of breaking into star condensation for the rest of their lives. Among the numerous thresholds of cultivation, although star condensation was not as dangerous as ethereal opening, it could not be taken lightly. It especially required the person breaking through to have sufficient experience and comprehension. No matter how much of a genius Qin Chongqing was, he was still not even 17 years old. Moreover, he did not possess the bloodline of the true dragon like Qiu Shanjun ever since he was a child. He had floated in the sea of the Tao and had cultivated for less than 2 years. How could he have had enough time to comprehend and experience? Even if he forcefully broke through and was fortunate enough not to experience a reversal of star radiance, if the order in which he opened the qi openings was wrong, or if the number of qi openings was too much, there was a chance that the star domain he condensed would be flawed. Let alone perfect, it might even be very ordinary. To ordinary cultivators, as long as they could condense a star domain, it was an extremely extraordinary feat in the present world. It was very difficult for even the star domains of star condensation experts to be called perfect. But he was Qin Chongqing, the future pope. The common people naturally had different requirements for him, just like what Su Li had mocked in the wilderness. Could such a star domain even be worthy of being called a star domain? The crowd waited for the result with different moods, so the expressions on their faces were naturally different. Go Hanqi's expression was very calm, Guan Feibai's very solemn, and Liang Banha's expression was rather desolate. This was because they had a deep understanding of Qin Chongqing. Since he had chosen this moment to break into star condensation, he had assuredly made ample preparations and was confident in himself. Zheshio's expression was very indifferent, but his pupils slightly constricted. Tang 36's face was rather pale, his hands tightly clenched. They understood Qin Chongqing even better and also believed that Qin Chongqing could successfully break into star condensation. However, they were still somewhat nervous, afraid that some accident might occur. No one knew that the person who was the most nervous was Su Yorong. She sat behind the curtain, her face expressionless, but her body was slightly leaning forward, as if she could stand up at any moment. A star began to shine in the daytime. Star radiance descended from the heavens and poured into Qin Chongqing's body. The hard stone platform sank half a foot because of this, and the scenery of the lake and mountain fell silent. Qin Chongqing's eyes were still closed, but he had already woken up and returned to the real world. He performed meditative introspection and examined the situation in his body. He confirmed that his ethereal palace was already wide open, that all his true essence had begun to ignite, and that the star radiance pouring into his body was about to go out of control. He knew that it was time to make a choice. He naturally wanted to condense a perfect star domain, and he also had the confidence that he could do this. Star condensation required a very long time to comprehend, sense, experience, and prepare. Although he had only cultivated for 2 years, he had already spent a great deal of time. Because his cultivation had always been different from others, he had begun meditative introspection before he had even succeeded in purification. When he had been drawing in starlight for purification, he had actually been at ethereal opening. He had always been using methods that surpassed his true cultivation level to cultivate. Last year, in the Mausoleum of Books, when he was at ethereal opening, he had already begun star condensation ahead of time. In the wilderness, when Su Li had passed on the intellectual sword to him, he had stood by the lake and gazed at the starry sky, pondering how to break the star domain of a star condensation expert. At the same time, he was also pondering how to project the sea of stars into his own body, how to light up his qi openings, and what kind of star domain to condense. His starry sky had already been there for a long time. All he needed to do was wait for it to light up. Because I was stuck on a specific method of telling a plot, I pondered it for a very long time, but in the end, I still could not come to a conclusion. I decided to move it to the next chapter. I thought for another night and stopped here. Chapter 595. On the stone platform by the lake, there was no longer any wind nor any sound. Suddenly, there was a muffled sound of thunder. This sound of thunder was a bit strange because it didn't come from the real world, but from people's sea of consciousness. This sound of thunder came from Qin Changsheng's body. It didn't come from the vibrations of the air, but from the explosion of true essence and the burning of qi openings. Somewhere on Qin Changsheng's chest suddenly became bright. The light came from his body, penetrated through his tattered Taoist robe, and reflected into everyone's eyes. That qi opening was lit up by him. Soon after, more and more muffled sounds of thunder sounded. These sounds of thunder seemed to come from the sky, but actually came from his body. More and more spots of light appeared in the depths of his Taoist robe. The order in which these qi openings were lit up seemed to have no pattern. These qi openings also didn't seem to have any connection with each other. If these qi openings were to be connected with a line, it would only be a very sloppy picture. As time went by, the atmosphere became more and more tense. The gazes that fell on Qin Changsheng became more and more concerned. He had already lit up many qi openings in his body. His Taoist robe became brighter and brighter, as if it was a glass lamp, incomparably bright from the inside out. At a certain moment, the sound of thunder finally stopped. He finally stopped the process of the star radiance lighting up the qi openings. No one could clearly see how many qi openings he had lit up. Did he light up dozens of qi openings like ordinary cultivators, or did he light up more than 100 or even 200 qi openings like those cultivators with extraordinary talent? The quiet world around him began to move. The breeze on the surface of the lake lightly brushed against his tattered Taoist robe. The light in the robe gradually faded, revealing star-like spots of light. Those spots of light seemed messy, but in reality they had their own pattern. They were the countless stars in the night sky, forming a complete star chart. This was the star domain. Qin Changsheng opened his eyes. His eyes were still as clean as before, but compared to before, there were some subtle changes. The depths of his clear eyes faintly emitted the light of stars, as if they were jade that had been washed by water for countless years. His presence had also undergone a great change, becoming purer and stronger. The lake breeze blew gently, causing his Taoist robe to flutter. He stood up, stardust drifting out from his sleeves and slowly dancing in the air. The stardust gradually disappeared, and so did the countless stars on his Taoist robe. However, an invisible barrier remained. He was still standing in the same place, but he was no longer in this world. There was a deathly silence. Qin Changsheng had successfully entered star condensation. Furthermore, the star domain he had condensed looked so complete that it even gave off a feeling of perfection. Previously, Gohanshi had revealed his star condensation cultivation in front of Scholatry Manor's Zhonghui, causing everyone to feel incomparable shock and admiration. But what about now? He broke Qiushan Jun's record, becoming the youngest star condensation cultivator in history. The silence was finally broken by excited discussions and shock sighs. The place became extremely lively. Seeing Qin Changsheng open his eyes, Tang 36's tightly clenched fists finally relaxed. Then he looked at Guan Fei Bai and raised his eyebrows with an indescribable pride. Guan Fei Bai did not look at him, nor did he look at Qin Changsheng. Instead, he looked at Guan Bai, who was slowly rising to his feet, his face filled with respect. Many people were also looking at Guan Bai with admiration and reverence. Only now did some people completely understand why Qin Changsheng had asked Guan Bai to wait a while for him. And Guan Bai had actually just quietly waited. This sort of demeanor was truly worthy of praise. There were also some people gazing at the high platform, at that beautiful figure behind the curtain. These people were thinking that since Qin Changsheng had succeeded in breaking into star condensation, the holy maiden's mood would presumably be extremely poor. Qin Changsheng sensed that star in the distant sky, sensed the power of its radiance, sensed the endless flow of true essence through his meridians, and was deeply moved. Because he had spent so much time comprehending and preparing, he was very confident that he could condense a perfect star domain. But a star domain was one thing. To him, the most important aspect of succeeding in star condensation was that it could partially resolve the problem of his true essence being limited due to the blockage of his meridians. It was even possible for him to borrow this power to directly break open those blockages in his meridians. He currently felt his body brimming with boundless strength. He was confident that if the demon lord came again and he opened the yellow paper umbrella, he would be able to block at least 2 of his attacks. This also meant that even if he faced the world's most powerful expert, he would still be able to protect his life for at least an instant. Although an instant could not cover 10,000 li, nor could it cover 100 years, it was enough for him to use all the methods he had hidden, allowing him to find a way to break through space and enter the Garden of Zhou. And as long as he entered the Garden of Zhou, he was confident that neither the demon lord nor any other terrifying expert would be able to kill him in a short amount of time. The result of his calculations was very perfect, which made him feel very at ease. The flow of true essence in his body and this rich feeling of strength strengthened this feeling. Breaking into star condensation strengthened his perception, making the scenery of the lakes and mountains in his eyes even more vivid. In short, he had never felt that the world was so beautiful. A few nights ago, after that long conversation with Su Yorong, he had resolved to break into star condensation during the Boiling Stone Summit. What he pursued was precisely this feeling of ease. Thus, even though he knew that his cultivation was far inferior to his opponent's, he still accepted his opponent's challenge. He wanted to borrow this pressure to break through that most crucial wall. Of course, he needed to thank his opponent for giving him this opportunity, and for giving him so much time in such a carefree manner. Chen Chongsheng sincerely bowed to Guanbai and said with a sincere expression, "Many thanks, senior." Guanbai did not avoid it. He had given Chen Chongsheng 1 year precisely because he wanted to see if he could successfully break into star condensation in this 1 year. As expected, you did not disappoint me, did not disappoint the world. He looked at Chen Chongsheng and said, "But in today's sword battle, I still have to win." In this battle, Guanbai was fighting in place of Zhuang Huanyu, who had committed suicide by the cold well of the Heavenly Tao Academy. He had the dignity of an expert on the path of the sword, the bearing of the young leader of the Heavenly Tao Academy. He could give Chen Chongsheng enough time to break into star condensation, could even protect him, but he would not let Chen Chongsheng leave with the attitude of a victor. By successfully breaking into star condensation, Chen Chongsheng had accomplished his most important goal in coming to Mount Han. Whether it was the Pope's or Su Li's expectations, they had already been completely realized by him. He had no interest in the Heaven Stone, even if he knew that the little black stone on the plate probably had some secret relationship with Wang Jitsa. He did not care about the outcome of this battle and was completely capable of leaving, but out of gratitude and respect for Guanbai, he had to seriously finish this battle, giving his first battle after breaking into star condensation to his opponent. He raised the stainless sword in his hand and pointed it at Guanbai, calm and respectful. Guanbai raised the sword in his left hand and very casually chopped down from above. Above was the heavens, below was the earth. Chopping down from above meant descending from the heavens. But his sword was not a waterfall descending from the heavens, but more like a flowing cloud high in the sky, carrying with it an even more profound meaning. As he gazed at this seemingly simple sword, Gohanshi's expression instantly turned extremely solemn. The hair at Jeshio's temples suddenly floated up like steel wires. The beautiful figure behind the curtain seemed to faintly move forward. They could see the terrifying aspect of Guanbai's sword. While Chen Chongsheng was breaking into star condensation, Guanbai was not idle. He also sat cross-legged on the ground, accumulating and comprehending. Guanbai was comprehending the world around him, the stones in the lake behind him, as well as the changes in the world and the movements of the stones as Chun Chongsheng broke into star condensation. From this, he sought out a pattern and then refined it. This sword of his was no longer strength but a pattern. The pattern of the world was the heavenly Tao. Although this sword of his was still far from being the true heavenly Tao, it was still an incomparably real sword of the heavenly Tao. As the head of the 6 ivies for the past 100 years, the Heavenly Tao Academy naturally had its extraordinary aspects. Its most extraordinary aspect was its Taoist technique that could sense the heavenly Tao. As the previous principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy, Mao Chuyu was naturally incomparably familiar with this sword of Guanbai's. His face revealed sorrow, reminiscence, gratification, and many other emotions. In his view, Chun Chongsheng had no way of receiving this sword, even though he had already broken into star condensation and his cultivation had skyrocketed. The Heavenly Tao sword was the strongest sword of the Heavenly Tao Academy. This sword required the wielder to raise their spirit and spirit to the most perfect level, then become one with the world around them. Only then could it be used. It was impossible for cultivators of the same level to block this sword. Even the wielder himself, once he began to use this sword style, would find it impossible to stop. Because the Heavenly Tao could not be disobeyed, the Heavenly Tao could not be defied. If it were a normal cultivator who had just broken into star condensation and whose cultivation was still unstable, they would perhaps have thoughts of giving up before Guanbai's Heavenly Tao sword. But Chun Chongsheng would not. Although when he saw this sword descend from the sky, he already knew that he did not have much confidence in defeating Guanbai. He still wanted to try and receive this sword. It was precisely because this sword represented the Heavenly Tao. In the last few years, he had been fighting against fate. What he wanted to fight against was the Heavenly Tao. He had to win, or at the very least, he could not lose that heart that dared to challenge the Heavenly Tao. So not only did he not retreat, he took a step forward to welcome the Heavenly Tao sword. As his step fell, thunder began to roar once more, as if countless small storms were taking form in his body and then beginning to furiously revolve. Boom! The star radiance in Tensum Chi openings began to explode, then link together into a line. A blocked meridian was thus opened. Everyone in the surroundings was able to clearly sense that the aura he emanated was actually much stronger than before. But this was still not enough to help him defeat the Heavenly Tao. He very calmly took another step forward. As his step fell, the wind stirred and his Taoist robe madly danced. Although it was tattered, it was like a banner of war. Another blocked meridian was opened, and his chi once more grew stronger. Soon after, his third step fell, and yet there was no thunder, no wind. There was no sound at all, only silence. His brow creased, somewhat pained, somewhat astonished. He turned his head to a certain place, seeming to be in great difficulty, as if this simple movement had consumed all his strength. That place was the high platform, isolated by a curtain. He gazed at the beautiful figure behind the curtain, his expression slightly perplexed, seeming very helpless. Just what had happened? He stood on the stone platform, his face pale, seemingly unable to make any movement. And at this moment, the Heavenly Tao sword had already slashed down. Chapter 596. Chun Chongsheng toppled over. His eyes were tightly shut, no longer feeling anything. His fall was so decisive that it was like a tree on the summit of a mountain being blown over by the wind, like a mountain on the ground being quaked, like the toppling of the earth. At the same time, Guanbai had already arrived in front of him, his sword also arriving. As he gazed at the fallen Chun Chongsheng, his face revealed shock and confusion. Yet he could no longer stop the sword in his hand, because this sword represented the will of the Heavenly Tao. Even though it was in his hand, he could no longer control it. Just what had happened? Why had Chun Chongsheng suddenly collapsed? These questions had only just begun to appear in the minds of everyone present. But no one had the time to prevent the following tragedy from occurring. Because no one could have imagined that just a moment ago, He had broken into star condensation and shocked the entire audience, and in the next moment he would enter such a strange state. Go Hanshi believed that even if Chen Chongqing was not Guanbai's match, he should still be able to receive this attack. This was because he understood Chen Chongqing. Without sufficient confidence, he would not take that step. Zhexiu and Tang 36 were even more brimming with confidence in Chen Chongqing. They even unreasonably believed that Chen Chongqing could defeat Guan Bai's heavenly Dao sword in a situation that no one was optimistic about. Mao Chiyu was most clear on the expert of the sword of the heavenly Dao and its characteristic of no return. He was sure that Chen Chongqing would lose. But how could he have imagined that Chen Chongqing would not even be able to raise his sword or even move it? Without even thinking about it, just who had the ability to react in such a short amount of time? Only the Elder of Heavenly Secrets could change all of this. He had known beforehand that Chen Chongqing had a hidden illness. Although he was not sure when the hidden illness would break out, he knew that it was related to cultivation. From the moment Chen Chongqing began to break into star condensation, he had always been frowning as he watched the scene. Moreover, as an expert of the divine domain, he had the ability to display a sufficiently powerful technique in the cracks of time, and yet his wrinkled and incomparably aged hand rested on the armrest of his chair, blue veins faintly visible as it trembled. However, it still remained on the platform, with no intention of acting. Could it be that Chen Chongqing, having just broken into star condensation, should have been in high spirits, receiving the cheers of the crowd, would inexplicably die to the heavenly Dao sword? The shock and panic of the crowd finally became real, their voices shouting from their mouths. A cry of alarm had just risen from the platform when it was suddenly suppressed by the howling wind. A pair of pure white wings compressed the air at an unimaginable speed, stirring up a violent gale. The heavy curtains on the stage shattered into countless pieces, and a stream of light rushed out from behind the curtains. The speed of that figure was too shocking. Only a few people in the audience could vaguely see two pure white lines, but they could not see clearly that a pair of pure white wings compressed the air at an unimaginable speed, stirring up a violent wind between heaven and earth, and carrying that figure with a whistling sound. The stream of light arrived in front of Chen Chongqing. The sword of the heavenly law descended. A field of light blossomed like fireworks. In the light, there were countless lofty sword intents, countless exquisite sword techniques, but there was only one extremely tough and divine will. Sword of great light. A loud boom resounded. The water in the heaven lake was shaken off the surface of the lake like a reverse waterfall. The ground of the stone plateau shook violently as if there was an earthquake. Pebbles danced wildly and filled the entire area. The sun became incomparably dim. The smoke and dust gradually settled, revealing the scene on the stage. An extremely thin tear had appeared on the left side of Guanbai's lapel, but there was no blood. He held his sword, his expression blank, not knowing what had happened as he stared forward in a daze. Where his gaze rested, a large pit had appeared on the stone plateau. This pit was much deeper than the pit created by Chen Chongqing's star condensation, and it was filled with pebbles. Su Yurong stood at the bottom of the pit, her hand gripping the temple sword, her face pale. Squelch! She spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood fell to the ground and instantly began to burn. Golden red flames easily melted the pebbles on the ground. This was the true blood of the heavenly phoenix. Even though she possessed the bloodline of the true phoenix and possessed astonishing talent in her unprepared state, she had forcefully received Guanbai's sword of the heavenly Dao, so she had still been heavily injured. But in the end, before anyone could react, she had rushed in front of Chen Chongqing and received the sword, forcibly shaking the will of the so-called heavenly Dao. She had not allowed Guanbai's sword to fall on Chen Chongqing's body, not even a sliver of sword intent. The temple sword of South Stream Temple, extremely important and precious to Holy Maiden Peak, had been carelessly thrown to the ground by her, because she wanted her hands free. She took the unconscious Chen Chong Sheng into her bosom. 2 snow-white wings slowly descended, gently enveloping the 2 of them, just like on the island of grass in the lake of the garden of Zhou. At this sight, the lakeshore was quiet, the crowd incomparably shocked. No one had expected that the first person present to react, to risk her life and be heavily injured to protect Qin Changsheng, would actually be her. In the crowd's view, she was the person who was least likely to appear. Countless gazes fell on Su Yurong's body, but she simply did not care, just like how she did not care about the temple sword in the rubble. She only looked at Chen Changsheng in her bosom, her face pale, uneasy, and fearful. At this moment, she was beautiful, sorrowful, helpless, and weak. No one had ever seen her like this, not the people of the Mount Li Sword sect, not the Elder of Heavenly Secrets, and presumably not the Holy Maiden or the Tianhai Divine Empress either. Just what was going on here? Zheshio charged over, several dozen sword and tents crisscrossing and blocking his path. The house was right in front of him, but he could not approach a single step because the female disciples of South Stream Temple had laid down a sword array in front of the house. Not many of the cultivators participating in the Boiling Stone Summit could bring along their companions from their sections. The ones with the most were probably the Orthodoxy and Holy Maiden Peak. This was also a result of their status. The 100-some South Stream Temple disciples that had escorted Su Yurong to Mount Han were all standing guard outside the house. South Stream Temple's sword array was extremely famous. Back then, when Zhou Dufu charged into Holy Maiden Peak, he had also expended some effort. No matter how valiant Zheshio was, he could not rely on his own strength to charge through. Zheshio was expressionless, but in reality he was extremely worried about Chen Changsheng's current situation. Being forced back by South Stream Temple's sword array and having a wound on his shoulder. Not only did this not dispel his thoughts, it only aroused his viciousness. A smear of blood appeared in the depths of his eyes, and sharp claws extended from his fingers. He was preparing to transform and use his abilities to fight on the brink of life and death. But before he could act, he was stopped by someone else. Tang 36 looked at him and shook his head. At the very front of the South Stream Temple sword array, a female disciple looked at the crowd outside the house and sternly said, "The Holy Maiden said that anyone who dares to take a single step into this house will be killed, without question." Yes, let alone Tang 36 and Zheshio, even powerful figures of the Orthodoxy, like Mao Chuyu and Ling Haizhuang, could not enter the house. Besides the unconscious Chen Changsheng, the only people in the house were Su Yurong and the Elder of Heavenly Secrets. Chapter 597. Sword and tents crisscrossed, and sword glows flowed like water. This was the hall that the Orthodoxy resided in, but it was now under the control of Holy Maiden Peak. Several hundred people stood outside the building, the people of the Orthodoxy at the very front. Upon hearing the words of the South Stream Temple disciple, their complexions became abnormally unsightly as they asked, "Just what does the Holy Maiden want to do?" This was also the question that everyone wanted to ask. The crowd had still not completely recovered from their shock. First, why had Qin Changsheng suddenly fallen unconscious? Had he failed to break through and cause the star radiance to flow in reverse? But at the time, everyone had clearly seen that he had clearly succeeded in condensing his star domain. In the records of the past, no cultivator had ever encountered this sort of problem. The second was Saintess Su Yurong's performance. Just when everyone couldn't react in time and could only watch in shock as the sword of Heaven Dao fell, she unexpectedly appeared on the field and blocked the sword for Qin Changsheng, even at the cost of being heavily injured. Why had she been able to predict this sword in advance? Why had she been willing to block this sword for Qin Changsheng? The story of the engagement had been passed around the continent for a long time. Everyone knew of the grudge between the divine general's mansion and Chen Changsheng. Everyone thought that she and Qin Changsheng were enemies, even being seen as fated rivals. However, seeing her embrace Chen Changsheng in her arms, looking at the world as if it was nothing, revealing helplessness and frailty, who dared to believe those rumors? Zhixiu did not think of these questions. He only wanted to know Qin Changsheng's current situation. Being blocked outside the building by the sword array of the South Stream Temple disciples was something he could not accept. He did not continue charging into the building because Tang 36 was blocking his way. There were very few people in the world that knew of the true relationship between Su Yorong and Chen Changsheng, but Tang 36 was one of them. Now the Elder of Heavenly Secrets also knew, or perhaps confirmed, that his previous conjecture was correct, because he was currently in the building looking at Su Yorong. Su Yorong sat by the couch, no longer as fearful and helpless as before. She had already regained her composure, but her beautiful face was still filled with worry and concern. Her usual bright beauty had become much dimmer. Her hand lightly grasped Chen Changsheng's hand. Seeing this, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets mentally sighed. Chen Changsheng still had not awoken. Su Yorong gazed at the Elder of Heavenly Secrets. She did not speak, but her question was clear. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets shook his head and said, "His meridians have already been severed. There is no medicine or stone that can restore them." Chen Changsheng was the successor of the Pope, the future of the Orthodoxy. Regardless of the relationship between the Elder of Heavenly Secrets and the Pope, it was impossible for them to watch as something happened to Qin Changsheng in Mount Han. The countless medicines and pills stored in the pavilion of Heavenly Secrets had long since been delivered to him. His bed was even piled high with crystals, but they were of no use to his injuries. Anyone who heard this would probably feel despair, but Su Yorong's expression was still as calm as ever. She asked, "How many are broken?" "There are a total of 72 meridians and 365 chi openings in the human body." As a saintess who had been cultivating since childhood, she knew better than anyone else the location and direction of the meridians and chi openings. She also knew the serious consequences of breaking meridians. She was very worried about Chen Changsheng's current situation, but she needed to understand the specific situation in more detail so that she could give targeted treatment later. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets fell silent for a very long time, then said, "Everything." "All of them?" Su Yorong repeated. Her delicate and slender eyebrows rose up like swords. Her bright and limpid eyes narrowed. It was still swords. She did not believe the Elder of Heavenly Secrets' words. Even if Chen Changsheng failed to break through and star radiance flowed in reverse, according to the records and medical records, even the most severe backlash suffered by those cultivators would not be able to sever all the meridians in their bodies in such a short amount of time. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets said, "His meridians have always had problems. I vaguely knew before, but I didn't think that the problem would be this serious." Su Yorong gazed at Chen Changsheng on the bed, at his tightly closed eyes, his pale face, and asked, "Just what sort of problem has occurred with his meridians?" The Elder of Heavenly Secrets replied, "His innate sun wheel collapsed in his mother's womb, causing his meridians to be blocked and broken. At the same time, the walls of his meridians are much weaker than those of an ordinary person." Upon hearing these words, Su Yorong was quiet for a very long time. A hint of pity appeared in her eyes as she gazed at Qin Changsheng. Why would a problem occur now? I also didn't expect that the problem would erupt now. Now that I think about it, when he was breaking through, star radiance surged in and burst the walls of his meridians. This problem, why didn't he think of a way to resolve it before? This is an illness that cannot be cured. There is no illness that cannot be cured, Su Yorong calmly said as she gazed at the unconscious Qin Changsheng. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets looked at her and said with a hint of pity, "This is an illness that he has had since he was in his mother's womb. This is his fate." Was there an illness in the world that could not be cured? There was, and that was fate. The stone seal flickered in and out of existence in the snowstorm. The demon lord stood at the highest point of Shualao City, gazing at the country he ruled. His expression was extremely indifferent, the broken mountains and rivers on his face already vanishing. A thin and small figure slowly walked out of the snowstorm and then kneeled behind him. "Rise." The demon lord's voice was emotionless. She stood up, her expression even more indifferent than the demon lord's, her voice even colder. "Imperial Father, I want to go to the capital." As she said this, she thought of those things she had encountered in the Garden of Zhou, those words that Qin Changsheng had said and subconsciously frowned. In this way, the somewhat wide space between her eyes seemed to shrink a little. "Not permitted," the demon lord impassively said to his daughter. Nang's expression did not change. "Qin Changsheng will return to the capital." The demon lord fell silent at these words. Just a moment ago, a persimmon on the persimmon tree he had brought back from the stream in Mount Han had ripened. It fell onto the white jade steps and smashed into a puddle of pulp, looking just like a crushed head. He had sensed it, so he had come into the snowstorm to observe his own country and ponder the matter of longevity. His Changsheng and the human called Changsheng. "I'm very curious as to who will eat that fruit in the end." The demon lord continued, "No one can resist that temptation, just like your brother. A ripe fruit would exude a fragrance, just like the throne of the demon lord that represented supreme authority." Nank calmly said, "I will kill him." It was hard to say whether the him here was referring to Qin Changsheng or her brother. Daoist Ji and Su Ren entered the capital, but did not enter the capital. They went to the Mausoleum of Books and found a grass hut in an orchard on the eastern side of the mausoleum. Perhaps because of the existence of the Mausoleum of Books, no one in the capital noticed the return of this person involved in the bloody case of the Orthodox Academy. At the end of the divine path of the Mausoleum of Books, under the pavilion, the Mausoleum Guardian, the #1 divine general of the continent, Han Qing, also seemed to be asleep. Summer crept by, and autumn was about to arrive. Yurin went to the abandoned garden outside the garden to pick green peppers. Because his legs were inconvenient, he did not walk very far before getting tired. He stretched out his hand to support himself against a tree trunk to rest. With just a light support, quite a few fruits fell from the tree and rolled everywhere. One could imagine just how ripe they were. Yurin's face lit up with joy, and he crouched down to pick up the fruits, preparing to let his master have a taste tonight. However, the moment his hand fell on the fruit, his expression changed. He also did not understand why, but he felt especially sorrowful. He suddenly very much missed his junior brother. The heavenly tone monoliths were the source of all the orthodoxy's knowledge. The starry sky was the direction of all the orthodoxy's spirit. These were all fate. There was not a single believer who did not feel reverence towards this. Holy Maiden Peak was a true disciple of the orthodoxy's southern faction, so it was naturally no exception. Su Yuran had received this sort of education since she was a child, and this sort of thinking had long since seeped into her bones. It was impossible for her to be like Wang Zhize and Qin Changsheng and say that they did not believe in fate. The elder of heavenly secrets had said that there was no cure for Qin Changsheng's illness, that it was fate. She lowered her head, her eyelashes lightly trembling. "I want to bring him back to the capital. The Empress and His Holiness the Pope are both there. There will be a way to cure him." "No one can cure him." The elder of heavenly secrets looked at her, his expression grave and stern. "The Empress can defy the heavens and change fate, but can you?" Su Yurong was quiet for a while, then said, "Perhaps not, but I want to try." She believed in and revered fate, even calmly accepting all the fate that was bestowed upon her, whether it was good or bad. But she could not accept the many tragedies and injustices that fate had inflicted upon Qin Changsheng. She released Qin Changsheng's hand and lightly placed it on his forehead. The elder of heavenly secrets knew what she wanted to do and warned, Do not use the sacred light technique. That will only worsen his injuries. Su Yurong did not respond, nor did she have any intention of moving her hand away. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets' voice became rather cold. You don't believe me? Su Yurong indifferently replied, Yes. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets fell silent, then asked, Why? Su Yurong raised her head to look at him and calmly replied, Because you did not attack just now. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets had just admitted that he had seen the problem with Chun Chongqing's meridians, indicating that he had already made preparations for this matter. When Guan Bai's heavenly Tao sword descended, logically speaking, only he could have changed the final result. But he did nothing, calmly sitting on the high platform. Su Yurong calmly gazed at the Elder of Heavenly Secrets. In terms of seniority or strength, she was far inferior to the leader of the storms of the 8 directions, but she was the holy maiden of the South, representing an extremely powerful faction in the orthodoxy. Her calmness had its own majesty, and her question had its own sharpness. Do you really want him to die? The Elder of Heavenly Secrets gazed at the unconscious Chen Chongqing on the bed. After a moment of silence, he said, I already told him that if he continued to cultivate, problems would definitely occur, but he did not listen, so he will become the Empress's problem. If you let him continue to live, then in the future, who will resolve this problem for the Empress? He did not directly answer Su Yurong's question, but he had already tacitly agreed. Su Yurong looked into his eyes and asked, What does this problem have to do with the Empress? Although I am called Heavenly Secrets, even if I exhaust my mind, I can only pry into 1 or 2 of the secrets of the heavens. I know the way, but not the reason. Saying this, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets held his hands behind his back and walked out of the building. As the oldest member of the divine domain in the current generation of the Demon Lord, he truly was very old, his back somewhat stooped. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets actually enjoyed interacting with young people. His willingness to support the Divine Empress was for the same reason. He was very fond of Su Yurong and Qin Chongqing. He originally wanted to explain to Su Yurong that a few days ago he had used the Heavenstone array of Mount Han to imprison the Demon Lord. In the end, the Demon Lord had broken the array and escaped, inflicting heavy injuries on him. But in the end he said nothing, because it was a fact that he had been heavily injured, and it was also a fact that he wanted Chun Chongqing to die. As she watched the Elder of Heavenly Secrets leave, Su Yurong's mind finally relaxed somewhat. Her face that had been as sharp as a sword once more became calm and gentle. At this moment, the female disciple of South Stream Temple, Yi Xiaolian, arrived outside the hall. Kneeling in front of the door, she said, Temple Master, there is an urgent matter to report. Chapter 598. What is it? Su Yurong did not raise her head, not even batting an eyelash. Someone wants to force their way in. Yi Xiaolian uneasily said, It's someone from the Orthodox Academy. Su Yurong was keenly aware that it was Zheshio who dared to force his way into South Stream Temple's sword array and still wanted to see Qin Chongqing. She expressionlessly replied, Break his legs. Yi Xiaolian asked, What about the 2 bishops? This was Mao Chuyu and Linghai Zhuang. As prefects of the orthodoxy, even South Stream Temple had to give them sufficient respect. Su Yurong said nothing, because she had already given her orders. She only calmly gazed at Chun Chongqing on the couch. Yi Xiaolian gazed at the distant, beautiful figure from outside the threshold, her mood rather strange. Her talent was not bad, and she had entered Gentle Stream Temple to cultivate at a very young age. Gentle Stream Temple was very close to Mount Li's sword training grounds, and when she was young, she would often see Qiushan Jun practicing the sword there. Like all the other girls, she very naturally became Qiushan Jun's loyal follower. Thus, on the divine avenue of the Li Palace in the capital, she had spoken rudely to Qin Chongqing, only to be cursed by Tang 36 into tears. Later on, many things happened. She went to the garden of Zhou, and the object of her worship and love gained a person called Qin Changsheng. Perhaps for this reason, she had always felt a faint jealousy of Su Yorong, but the difference between the two was too great, so she had no way of expressing it. In the spring, after the conclusion of the grand examination, she entered South Stream Temple from Gentle Stream Temple, so she would even less likely to show this sort of emotion in front of Su Yorong. As time passed, the jealousy hidden deep in her heart had long since vanished. In the end, the object of her worship and love had even changed from Qiu Shanjun and Qin Changsheng to Su Yorong, just like the common people of the capital and the senior sisters of South Stream Temple. She now looked at Su Yorong sitting on the couch and felt that she was very tall. If Mou were present, hearing Su Yorong's words and seeing her figure, she would assuredly feel that she was becoming more and more like the divine empress. Not long after Yi Xiaolian left, the outside gradually grew quiet. Su Yorong calmly gazed at Qin Changsheng and noticed that he would occasionally frown. It seemed that even in his unconsciousness he could still feel boundless pain. Her medical skills could not compare to Qin Changsheng's, but she could still be considered pretty good. After holding Qin Changsheng's hand for so long and silently feeling his pulse, she had long ago determined that the elder of Yorong's judgment was not wrong. If his meridians were all severed, how would he be treated? She looked back at the dark night sky outside the window. She didn't see any stars, so she knew there were clouds tonight. After confirming that no one was spying on them from outside the building, she turned around and undid Qin Changsheng's clothes. His tattered Taoist robe was thrown to the ground, and his underwear was taken off. During the entire process, her fingers were very steady, and her movements were very direct. There was no hesitation, and there wasn't a trace of embarrassment on her beautiful and slightly pale face. Qin Changsheng's skin was very smooth. It looked like a baby's skin that could be broken with a single blow. This meant that he had undergone the most perfect purification. Even after experiencing such a fierce battle and receiving such heavy internal injuries, there were no visible problems on the surface, not even the slightest wound. It looked like the colored porcelain popular in Shuilao City with a faint layer of pink. This kind of skin was perhaps the dream of all young girls. But Su Yorong's expression was exceptionally grave. Because that layer of pink wasn't because it was tender, but because Qin Changsheng's skin was oozing blood. The blood that seeped out from his severed meridians was currently slowly seeping through his body. At any moment, it could seep out of his body or flow out of his eyes, mouth, and nose. This blood was no ordinary blood, but his true blood. Every drop of blood contained his divine soul. Su Yorong thought of the words Qin Changsheng had said to her in the mausoleum of Zhou. Her expression grew even more grave, her face even paler, and a hint of anxiety finally appeared in her clear eyes. This was the matter that worried Qin Changsheng the most in his life, and it was also the matter that worried her the most. Just now, she had intentionally exposed the elder of Heavenly Secrets' intentions, not hesitating to fall out with him, precisely so that the elder of Heavenly Secrets would leave the house. In the capital, Qin Changsheng had once said to her that the blood he bled no longer had the scent that he feared the most, but it was clear that the situation had changed. Perhaps it was the moment he successfully broke through and attracted the radiance of the stars into his body. Su Yorong had no way of confirming whether or not her calculations were correct, but she could not take the risk. She could not let the blood in Qin Changsheng's body flow out. A light, yet suffused with a divine aura descended from her palm and enveloped Qin Changsheng's body. The elder of Heavenly Secrets had warned her that Qin Changsheng's meridians were currently all severed. Any sort of power, even sacred light, entering his body would only place an even greater burden on him, worsening his injuries. But she still unhesitatingly used the sacred light technique. It was not because she did not completely believe the elder of Heavenly Secrets' words, but because this sacred light was somewhat different. The clear light fell on the surface of Chen Changsheng's body, but it did not enter his body. Instead, it stopped extremely close to his skin, a distance of not even 1/10 of a hair. Su Yurong's palm slowly moved, and the clear light followed, slowly enveloping the surface of Chen Changsheng's body, not leaving a single spot untouched. This sort of technique required extremely powerful control, required an extremely tranquil, stable, and powerful spiritual sense. There were very few people in the world that could do this. Su Yurong's Tao heart was brightly lit. After using this sacred light technique, her face once more paled. The faint pink on the surface of Chen Changsheng's body, after being enveloped by that extremely thin layer of sacred light, became even fainter. Even if the scent of his true blood seeped out through his pores, it would still be perfectly isolated by the sacred light. After confirming that this problem had been temporarily resolved, Su Yurong's expression finally relaxed somewhat. The lake breeze blew in from outside the window, ruffling the hair on her temples. Fragrant sweat stuck to her pink cheeks, making her look very beautiful. The lake breeze blew through Mount Han. The clouds in the night sky suddenly dispersed for a moment. Silver light descended, and the pine trees rustled like a silver sea, a very beautiful sight. Perhaps because the wild beasts in the forest had smelled something, or perhaps because they had been startled by the sudden descent of starlight, they howled at the vast sky full of stars, carrying with them the uneasiness of being disturbed. In the depths of the pine forest that was like a silver sea, there was a rustling sound. The leaves were numerous, obscuring the majority of that thing's body. Only the lines that were exposed could be seen. They were extremely graceful, and under the starlight, suffused with a silver light, appearing especially holy. An eye peeked out from the dense leaves, brimming with intelligence and tranquility. However, as it gazed at the small house by the lake at the foot of the mountain, it revealed a tinge of perplexity. It had clearly smelled something before, so it had come from 1,000 li away, disregarding those repulsive monkeys by the lake. Why was it that there was no smell now? After some time it gave up. It turned and walked into the depths of the pine forest, borrowing the trees to conceal all traces of its body. Under the starlight, only a silver horn could be seen faintly discernible in the leaves. The wild beasts of Mount Han, because of an inexplicable restlessness, howled at the starry sky. The fish in the heaven lake also inexplicably became excited, constantly swimming in the water by the house. Several hundred little black fish surrounded the seed in the fine sand in the shallow water, constantly pecking at it, also seeming like they were kissing it. They pushed the seed farther and farther away, all the way to the depths of the lake, where it could no longer be seen. Su Yurong took out a cloth bag from her sleeve, took out a candied date, and threw it into her mouth. It was very sweet. At times like these, sugar could help calm the mind and calm the mind, and she liked to eat sweets. The first time she was brought to Holy Maiden Peak, she was still very young. Her teacher, the Holy Maiden, had asked her how she could maintain a steadfast Tao heart. She looked at the box of candied fruits on the table behind her teacher, twisted her small body, and shyly said, "It's just candied dates." Thinking of her childhood, she held the candied date in her mouth and happily laughed as she walked in. Then she remembered that a few nights ago, she and Chen Changsheng had sat shoulder to shoulder by the lake. At the time they had also been eating candied dates, but how could they maintain a steadfast Tao heart? Her mind was slightly in disarray. However, it was still very sweet. She gazed at Chen Changsheng on the couch, thinking, although he's not as handsome as senior brother, he can still be considered handsome. I can look at him, and he's more bearable to look at. In his dreams, Chen Changsheng was still tightly pursing his lips, his brow creased, as if in great pain. Su Yurong stretched out her hand and rubbed the space between his brows. Then her fingertip fell on his lips, and like a dragonfly, she lightly tapped and returned. "I won't let you die," she said, looking at him. Because she was holding the candied date, her voice was somewhat unclear, but it was also extremely clear. Blocking out the smell of Chen Chongqing's blood had only resolved the first problem. Next, she still had to resolve an even more troublesome problem. If Chen Chongqing continued to bleed like this, even if the blood was scattered among his internal organs, he would still die from excessive blood loss. How to staunch his bleeding was a very troublesome problem, because he currently could not endure the sacred light technique. And even if the bleeding was stopped, how to replenish his blood was also a very troublesome problem, because he had clearly lost too much blood. It was impossible to rely on his own hematopoietic mechanisms. If it were anyone else, they would not be able to resolve this problem. Just like the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had said, and just like Guan Bai's sword had faintly implied, the heavenly Tao could not be defied. Could the heavenly Tao ultimately not be defied? Su Yurong wanted to battle with the heavenly Tao, just like blocking that sword for him. She was confident, because when he had saved her, he had also taught her this. She took out the Tong Bao, her right forefinger lightly slicing across her left wrist. A bloody wound appeared on her jade wrist, which gradually expanded as more and more blood seeped out. The true blood of the heavenly phoenix ignited in the wind, emitting countless rays of light that illuminated her face with incomparable clarity, making her look incomparably beautiful. This chapter is good. I really like romance. Chapter 599. The Tong Palace was Bao Su Yurong's most powerful technique. At the same time, it was the spatial artifact of Holy Maiden Peak. From a certain perspective, it was like the stainless sword to Chen Chongqing. At this moment, the Tong Palace was placed vertically on Chen Chongqing's chest. Su Yurong's expression was focused on the point of contact. Her finger lightly plucked, and the bowstring began to vibrate at an unimaginable speed, transforming into a shadow that the naked eye could not see. What followed was a hum similar to the sound of a zither. Chen Chongqing had bathed in dragon's blood and was comparable to the most perfect purification. Normal weapons had no way of piercing through his skin. But at this moment, following the trembling of the bowstring, his chest was gradually being cut open by an extremely small wound. This was probably the principle of using nothing to penetrate something. Su Yurong obviously would not allow his blood to flow out from that wound. With a light wave of her left hand, clear light naturally sprinkled down, isolating the wound from the outside world. At the same time, with a slight movement of her divine sense, the burning heavenly phoenix true blood on her wrist was extinguished. She could no longer feel the boundless power, just like water. Her blood slowly flowed down the smooth body of the Bao. Relying on the natural contraction of the spatial artifact, it became an extremely thin line of blood that entered Chen Chongqing's body through that wound. After a long time, she stopped moving and used her fastest speed to repair Chen Chongqing's wound. Her face was pale and very weak, perhaps because of excessive blood loss. But she did not rest, because the treatment had not finished. She raised her right arm and used her sleeve to wipe the sweat off her forehead. She held Chen Chongqing's hand, closed her eyes, and began to mobilize her divine sense. Relying on the inseparable and intimate connection between her and the heavenly phoenix true blood, her divine sense entered Chen Chongqing's body without any hindrance. Following the heavenly phoenix true blood, it freely moved through his body, and she saw those broken meridians and even more dismal scenes. Blood flowed through the broken meridians and into his body. In the gaps between his internal organs was his true blood, which contained his divine soul. For some reason, it contained an endless aura of life. Although she did not truly touch it and only saw it with her divine sense, and although she was willing to dedicate her life to him, she still felt her spiritual world begin to tremble at that moment. An extremely strong desire was born in her, and she wanted to seize it. Su Yurong closed her eyes. Her eyelashes trembled, and her face became even paler. Fortunately, the candied date in her mouth turned into saliva, which helped her guard her Taoist heart. The true blood of the heavenly phoenix had already spread throughout Qin Changsheng's body. His 72 meridians, more than 300 qi openings, even the smallest places, such as the roots of his pores, had the presence of the blood. This was the moment. Su Yurong's divine sense moved quickly, and the heavenly phoenix, true blood attached to the broken meridians, almost simultaneously began to burn. Thousands of extremely tiny flames were born in Qin Changsheng's body. In an instant, all the flames were extinguished. Apart from the faint smell of burning, there was no other indication as to what had just happened. She had set a fire in Qin Changsheng's body and set it aflame. She had transformed the heavenly phoenix true blood into the finest of particles to cauterize the broken meridians, thus staunching the bleeding. At the same time, she did not harm the extremely thin and brittle meridian walls. Su Yurong opened her eyes and gazed at Qin Changsheng on the bed. After confirming that his injuries were under control, she finally relaxed. His 72 meridians had several thousand bleeding spots, but they had all been cauterized and sealed. He was no longer bleeding, so at least she did not have to worry about not being able to last through the night. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets had determined that Qin Changsheng would not be able to continue living, precisely because injuries like the broken meridians were basically incurable, especially under the premise that the sacred light technique could not be used. Who could have imagined that Su Yurong would actually be able to come up with such a fantastical idea and use such a miraculous method? She had transfused her heavenly phoenix true blood into Qin Changsheng's body, not only helping to staunch his internal bleeding, but also accomplishing another equally important task, replenishing his blood. In the present world, no doctor would choose this method of replenishing blood because different kinds of people had different kinds of blood. Different kinds of blood would clash in the body, causing a person to die even faster. The heavenly phoenix true blood was naturally precious, but not everyone could endure it. This was because it had always been the world's most tyrannical true blood. Even though her spiritual sense had restrained all its energy, its qi was still far too tyrannical. More importantly, her blood had always been different from the blood of other people in the world. Qin Changsheng's blood was also different from the blood of other people in the world. His blood was the purest, containing boundless vitality. As a result, in the Garden of Zhou, he had been able to replenish Su Yurong's blood. Now, Su Yurong's blood had long since fused with his, so she could naturally replenish his blood. Back then, he had insisted on saving her, so now she could save him. The reason was that simple. Zheshio's legs had not been broken by the female disciples of South Stream Temple, nor had the miserable sight of rivers of blood appeared in front of the building. The reason was also very simple. Tang 36 was at his side. "He'll be fine, there's no need for you to worry," he said to Zheshio. Zheshio expressionlessly asked, "You trust Su Yurong so much?" Tang 36 replied, "Even if the entire world harmed him, she wouldn't." Zheshio did not understand. The entire world, or at least everyone in Mount Han, also did not understand. When the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had left, he had not said much, only saying that the Holy Maiden would watch over him. Hearing this, the crowd was even more shocked and confused. What sort of status did Su Yurong have? It was already incomprehensible that she had braved danger to save Qin Changsheng, but now she wanted to personally watch over him? If she were still Qin Changsheng's fiancée, this matter could be explained. But hadn't the engagement been annulled long ago? Didn't they all say that she loathed him? The Mount Li disciples had rather strange expressions. Go Hanshi seemed pensive. In the end, Guan Feibai could not help but whisper, "No wonder eldest brother wanted to stay far away." The clouds had dispersed and the starlight shone on the lake. All was quiet, and everyone was immersed in their own thoughts. After some time, with the sound of the door being pushed open, Su Yurong walked out of the building. The crowd surged over like a tide. The South Stream temple sword array dispersed, but it still stood guard in front of Su Yurong. No one dared to ask anything of their own volition. Su Yurong looked at Tang 36 and Jeshio and said, "He still hasn't woken up. The two of you keep an eye on him. I want to rest a little." Only now did the crowd notice that her face was snow-white and she seemed extremely exhausted. Ling Haizhuang said, "I'll go see Principal Chen first." Su Yurong shook her head, calm but firm. Ling Haizhuang slightly creased his brow, confused and somewhat angry. He believed that since the two of them were on the same side, he should have been the leader in this matter, but he had unexpectedly been refused. What he needs the most right now is rest. Everything else can be discussed tomorrow. After saying this, she left under the escort of the South Stream Temple disciples. Not all of them left with her. Several dozen South Stream Temple disciples remained in front of the small building, the sword array blocking everyone else. Only Tang 36 and Jishio were allowed in. The crowd outside the building gradually dispersed. They all believed that Chen Chongqing had encountered some problems in breaking into star condensation. With the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets and the Holy Maiden most skilled in the sacred light technique personally intervening, there would naturally be no major hindrance. No one could imagine that if not for Su Yurong, Qin Chongqing would already be dead. At 5 a.m, Qin Chongqing woke up. He knew that it was 5 a.m, because he had always woken up at this time in the countless days that had passed. For a moment, he did not remember what had happened yesterday and prepared to get out of bed. And then he realized that he was not wearing any clothes. And then he realized that Tang 36 and Jishio were both by his bed, staring at him. This made him feel extremely uncomfortable. Only now did he remember what had happened yesterday, and his expression subtly shifted. Tang 36 saw that he had woken up and slightly relaxed, but he had no intention of speaking with him. He turned and walked out of the building, saying, "I'll go inform South Stream Temple." Qin Chongqing said, "No, she doesn't want others to know of our relationship." As he said this, he subconsciously glanced at Jeshio, thinking, Tang 36 did not hide anything from Jishio. Could it be that while I was unconscious, Tang 36 told him everything? The entire world knows now. Tang 36 unhappily replied and continued to rush out of the building. Qin Chongqing turned to Jishio. Jishio indifferently said, "I also know." Qin Chongqing froze, thinking, just what happened while I was unconscious? Chapter 600. Among the people of the Orthodox Academy, Jeshio's cultivation was not the highest, but his battle prowess was definitely the strongest. If it was a life or death battle, even Chen Chongsheng would not be his opponent, because he had an incomparably rich battle experience and a terrifying will tempered through life and death, but he had no experience in this sort of thing, much less any comprehension. "Doesn't she hate you?" He very directly asked the question in his heart. Qin Chongqing smiled. He didn't know how to answer this question, but this smile made him feel the taste of rust faintly seeping out from his throat. It was the taste of blood. His expression changed slightly. His spiritual sense moved slightly, and he performed meditative introspection. He then sank into a long period of silence, his face very pale. So, it was like this. Could it be that his great limit of 20 had arrived early? He could clearly feel that all the meridians in his body had been severed once, but for some reason, the thousands of wounds on his meridians had already been burnt and coagulated, no longer bleeding. Soon after, he understood why, because he could feel her blood flowing through his body. The clear and slightly cold lake water slowly flowed around the wooden pillars of the small building. The sound of footsteps could be heard. Su Yurong and Tang 36 walked into the building. Tang 36 indicated for Jishio to leave with him, so only Qin Chongsheng and Su Yurong were left in the building. The lake water was still slowly flowing downstairs. The little black fish was no longer as excited as before, but the core of the candied date had disappeared to who knows where. Qin Chongsheng and Su Yurong quietly stared at each other. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The scene was very quiet, even a little desolate. He thought to himself, in the end, I am a man. Some word should be said by me. He pursed his somewhat dry lips, looked at her, and very seriously said, I'm sorry. This simple apology had many meanings, such as he hid his illness, such as his fate was not good. He dragged her down, such as being unable to continue traveling with her. Su Yurong calmly stared into his eyes and said, That night, you said you had a secret you wanted to tell me. Was it this matter? Yes, my body has been weak since I was a child. After I was 10 years old, my soul overflowed from my broken meridians. My master concluded that I wouldn't live past 20 years old, but Qin Changsheng was silent for a while, then continued, I thought I could at least live to 20 years old. I still had more than 3 years of time. I thought I could really change my fate. I wanted to try, but I didn't expect that my 20 years would come early. Su Yurong said, and then... Qin Changsheng looked at her snow-white face and could imagine how much effort she had put in to save him. He said softly, I'm sorry. Su Yurong walked to the window with her hands clasped behind her back. Looking at the night sky full of stars, she said after a moment of silence, You wanted to tell me, but I didn't want to hear it, so there's no need to apologize. Qin Changsheng was silent for a long time and said, Fortunately, the engagement has been cancelled, or else I'll become a widow. Su Yurong didn't turn around, her voice turning cold. Qin Changsheng could feel her current emotions. He was somewhat touched, somewhat comforted, but more than anything, he felt uneasy. He looked at her back and said, I will die. Su Yurong's voice was even colder, even somewhat apathetic. And then Qin Changsheng said, Jishio's illness has a chance of being cured, but my illness truly cannot be cured. Su Yurong still said the same 2 words, and then Qin Changsheng continued, Senior Suli is so carefree and open-minded, yet he also doesn't agree to let his daughter marry Jishio. How could your parents agree to you marry me? Su Yurong replied, I don't need the orders of my parents, and my teacher has already gone far away. My marriage is my own matter. Qin Changsheng asked, Then what about the Empress? She dotes on you so much, cares for you so much. Don't tell me you don't need to listen to her opinion? Su Yurong's voice was very calm. I've never listened to the opinions of others in my matters. Moreover, if you really are Crown Prince Xiaoming, then whether you're sick or not, about to die or live for 10,000 years, the Empress will never agree to my marriage. So your question is meaningless. The starlight fell on the surface of the lake and was reflected by it, falling on the house. The silver also outlined her figure in a silver line. She looked very beautiful, as if she could fly away with the wind at any moment. As he watched her figure, Qin Changsheng felt that she was getting further and further away. He whispered, Then what about me? Su Yurong turned to look at him, the sleeves of her dress rising in the wind. Her voice was as cold as the wind. What about you? Qin Changsheng looked into her eyes, showing no intention of backing down. I won't let you marry someone about to die. I don't want you to tell the world about our relationship. Our engagement has already been dissolved. As long as we don't acknowledge it, then after I die, no matter who you marry, it will be much more convenient. For example, Qiushan Jun, after waking up and confirming that his meridians were all severed, that his vitality was gone, and that his days were numbered, he began to consider a few problems. This was his true opinion. This was his own decision. He thought he would calmly accept all of this. But when he said that she should marry someone like Qiushan Jun in the future, he didn't know why, but his heart still gave birth to a sour feeling. Su Yurong calmly looked at him, not speaking for a very long time. Just when Qin Changsheng thought that she would brush her sleeves and leave, she suddenly said, Just like you said, our engagement has already been dissolved, so there's no relationship between us. This being the case, what right do you have to use the tone of a fiancé to discuss how to arrange things for me after I die? Qin Changsheng didn't know how to respond, because everything she said was correct. But I really will die, and I will die very soon. Everyone will die. Emperor Taizong and Zhou Dufu will also die. This is a common occurrence. I'm just worried about you. Don't worry. While you're alive, I can die for you, just like how you can die for me. This was the most passionate words of love, the most sincere confession. But Su Yurong said it very calmly and indifferently, as if she was explaining the simplest truth. Water flows downwards. The sun will rise again after it sets. Everyone will die. We are lovers who walk the same path, so naturally we can sacrifice our lives for each other. If it was someone else, they definitely wouldn't be able to adapt to the contrast between these words of love and the situation, and would be stunned speechless. But Chen Changsheng's personality was also very special. He didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. Instead, he felt that this was the type of person he liked. Because he was also a similar person, no matter if he was facing life or death, he would put his emotions in the deepest part and face and deal with it calmly. But I won't live for you. When you're alive, I will live my own life. If you die, I will also live well. Su Yurong looked into his eyes and said, but first you have to fight to live. I also want to fight to let you live. I don't want you to die. This conversation about love before life and death came to an end at this point. She very calmly obtained the final victory of this debate. There's still a chapter at night. The original title was a conversation about love before life and death. I also wanted to name it then. But because when I posted it, I found that the word love couldn't be displayed, I got angry, so I insisted on using this title. I don't understand. How is this word sensitive? I'm really angry. Chapter 601. Before leaving, she said to Chen Changsheng, prepare to immediately return to the capital. I believe that there are definitely people in this world that can cure you. As the morning light began to brighten, Go Hanshi and the others once more came to the house and asked if they could visit. The relationship between Mount Li's Sword Sect and Holy Maiden Peak had always been close. The previous Holy Maiden was currently heading to another world with Su Li. Perhaps it was because of this, or perhaps it was because they were about to return to the capital, and Chen Changsheng would most likely never have the chance to see Go Hanshi and the others again. So Su Yurong did not refuse their request. Chen Changsheng leaned against the couch, covered with a brocade blanket. He smiled at Go Hanshi and the other two. Go Hanshi asked, a problem occurred while breaking through? Chen Changsheng first nodded, then shook his head. Anxious, Guan Feibai asked, is it true or not? Chen Changsheng replied, a few problems truly did occur while breaking through. It's not serious, just somewhat troublesome. But ultimately, the reason does not lie in this. Go Hanshi asked, then what is the reason? Chen Changsheng glanced at Guan Feibai and said, back then, all of you said that my fate was good, but in truth, my fate really is not good. I'm sick. Guan Feibai snapped, if you're sick, then cure it. Is there a need to act pitiful in front of us? Only the Elder of Heavenly Secrets and Su Yurong knew the specifics of the situation. Not even Tang 36 and Zhishio could guess at it. The cultivators that had come to the Heaven Lake of Mount Han to participate in the Boiling Stone Summit all believed that Chen Changsheng had encountered a few small problems while breaking through to star condensation. Go Hanshi and the others also believed this. Who could have imagined, who dared to imagine, that he was already nearing the end of his days? Chen Changsheng chuckled. That's reasonable, so I'll be leaving in a little while, returning to the capital to treat my illness. Will there be any trouble? Go Hanshi looked into his eyes and asked. Chen Changsheng shook his head. It's just that the journey will be a little long. There won't be any trouble. Guan Feibai and Liang Banhu thought that this was right. Although Chen Changsheng was not very old, he was the appointed successor of the orthodoxy. The confluence of the north and south had succeeded. The great Zhou dynasty was in its golden age, and the orthodoxy had millions upon millions of believers in the world. Along the way, Mao Qiuyu and Linghai Zhuang, two prefects, would be no trouble. At this moment, a South Stream Temple disciple came to report that the carriage was ready and the Holy Maiden asked when to leave. Guan Fei Bai had been guessing for an entire night. At this moment, he could no longer hold it in. He looked at him and asked, "You and junior sister Su know. What exactly is going on between you and the Holy Maiden?" Qin Chongxing thought, not knowing how to explain, so he chose to say, "Fortunately, Tang 36 and Jishyo had already finished packing their luggage, and the disciples of South Stream Temple had come to greet them. So they managed to gloss over this question. Tang 36 prepared to help him up, but he was stopped by South Stream Temple disciple Yi Xiaolian. Yi Chen. Tang 36 Xiaolian. Tang 36 was Tang. Tang, I said. If not I, do I know do I Tang. I Tang. 36 Chen Tang, the carriage. Tang Yang said. Tang. Chen, Chin, the sword, the carriage. Qin Chongxing said, "It has nothing to do with Senior. It's purely my own problem." Guan Bai replied, "But in the end it was all because of me. You are the future of the orthodoxy, 10,000 times more important than me. If, because of me, the overall situation of the human race against the demons is affected, even 10,000 deaths would not be enough to redeem me." Qin Chongxing said, "I heard that Senior has been fighting against the elites of the demon army in the north for a few years. I admire you very much. I only hope to have the chance to fight alongside you." But at this point, his mood finally became somewhat gloomy. There were still many things he had yet to do, and many places he had yet to visit. Although he had been to the snowy plains of the demonic realm, he had yet to do anything to help the soldiers and civilians there. Guan Bai naturally did not understand the true meaning of these words. There will always be a chance. In the future, we will meet again in the snowy plains. Qin Chongxing nodded and said goodbye. Go Hanshi and the others also stopped to bid farewell to him. Qin Chongxing looked at them. His expression was calm, but his mood was getting more and more depressed. He thought to himself that it was highly possible that he would never see them again. Standing under the pine tree and gazing at the gradually vanishing convoy at the end of the mountain path, Go Hanshi's expression grew solemn. Guan Fei Bai was somewhat confused. No matter how heavy the injury, how troublesome the illness, once we return to the capital, His Holiness the Pope will personally treat it. What need is there for Senior to worry? Qin Chongsheng's teacher is Principal Shang, and Principal Shang is Taoist Ji. We've also seen his medical skills before, and he can be called a divine physician. Junior Sister Sue's sacred light technique has long since been cultivated to the pinnacle. If the two of them can't treat this injury and illness, is there anyone else who can? Even if His Holiness the Pope really can, why does Junior Sister Sue want to follow him back to the capital? As Go Hanshi spoke, he organized his analysis. He felt that something was wrong more and more, and his expression grew even more solemn, even somewhat grim. Hearing these words, Guan Fei Bai came to his senses. Gazing at the end of the mountain path, he could still faintly hear the galloping of hooves. He somewhat anxiously asked, "What do we do? Should we chase after them and ask?" Go Hanshi replied, "Since he doesn't want to say, why bother asking?" The convoy headed south at high speeds, smashing countless green leaves and fruits along the way. The mountain path was covered in ruts and crushed fruit and leaves. Qin Chongsheng was not in the Orthodoxy's carriage, but in Holy Maiden Peak's imperial carriage. The disciples of South Stream Temple were at his side, ready to form a sword array at any time. Those curtains could not block out those doubtful and curious gazes, but their swords could block out those gazes from disturbing the person behind the curtains. Just like in the pavilion by the lake, the Holy Maiden had decreed that no one was allowed to come into contact with Qin Chongsheng. Logically speaking, although Su Yurong was the Holy Maiden of the South and had an extremely noble and lofty status, Qin Chongsheng was still the future pope. There was no reason for the people of the Orthodoxy to agree to this arrangement. However, perhaps because of the engagement that had once existed, or perhaps because Holy Maiden Peak was acting too unyielding. Mao Chuyu and Ling Haizhuang did not raise any objections. Of course, the most important reason was that Chen Changsheng himself did not oppose this arrangement. Tang 36 knew the inside story, so he naturally would not raise any objections. Zhixiu, on the other hand, still did not understand the entire matter. The 500 li of Mount Han was quickly left behind by the madly galloping caravan. After leaving the mountain gate with the words "Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets," they quickly arrived at the small village at the base of the mountain. The populace and believers of the village kneeled on both sides of the road like a tide. There were even people in the fields, but it was impossible for the carriage of the Holy Maiden and the future Pope to stop here for even a moment. In the end, all that could be seen was some dust and a faint image. The snowstorm and bitter cold of the snowy plains were blocked by Mount Han. The plains of the north, at the beginning of summer and autumn, could still be considered verdant. Up close, one could see many melons and newly sprouted bean vines. But if one looked into the distance, the greenery that represented life would rapidly fade, mixing with the sandstorms on the horizon and gradually becoming desolate. It looked just like the wastelands where the human race and the demon race had fought. The curtains fluttered and the wind from the front of the road poured in, but it could not blow against his face. Qin Changsheng knew that this carriage had some sort of array attached to it. Only by doing so could it match the Holy Maiden's status and identity, but in the end he still felt that it was a little too extravagant. He wanted to say something, but he also felt that it was inappropriate. When he saw the vast scenery in the distance, his thoughts shifted elsewhere. He gazed at the plains that seemed to hide countless cavalry and said, "Yesterday, Heavenly Secrets coldly watched me die, then many people loyal to the Empress must also want me to die, right?" The armies of the great Zhou imperial court were all under the command of the 38 divine generals, and besides Han Qing, who guarded the mausoleum of books, all the other divine generals were like Xue Xingchuan and Su Shiji, absolutely loyal to the divine empress. The journey from Mount Han to the capital was a long one, and they would have to pass through many passes and strategic towns. If the two sides truly shed all pretense of cordiality, an army could attack at any time. Returning to the capital would not be so simple. Su Yurong was injured and had not slept for almost an entire night, so she was exhausted to the extreme. After leaving Mount Han, she had been resting with her eyes closed. Now, hearing his rueful sigh, she opened her eyes and glanced into the distance. That depends on whether Heavenly Secrets will inform the capital of your matter and who it will inform. Before we return to the capital, whether this news will reach the military headquarters of those divine generals. Moreover, I don't understand, even if you're alive, what effect will you have on the Empress? How can your existence affect her? Qin Changsheng looked around and saw that amidst the dancing gauze, there were South Stream temple disciples everywhere. Tang 36 and Zhixiu were riding their horses 20-some zhang in front, while Mao Chuyu and Ling Haizhuang were leading the orthodoxy's convoy very far behind. Moreover, this array was probably able to block the detection of spiritual sense. You should have heard the rumor that the Empress defied the heavens and changed her fate, he said to Su Yurong. Su Yurong vaguely guessed at what he wanted to say. Arching her brows, she said, "Could it be that you also believe the nonsense of those ignorant people in the marketplace and countryside?" Qin Changsheng looked into her eyes and said, "I read Wang Jitse's notebook in the pavilion of Lingyan." This was a secret his teacher had told him. He had never told anyone else, but he had never thought of hiding it from Su Yurong, because his blood flowed through her body, and her blood flowed through his body. As the saying went, blood and water blended. Mutual trust, nothing could surpass this. After a very long time, he concluded his story. Su Yurong looked at him and said, "You understand what I mean. Even if the Empress defied the heavens and changed her fate, it's impossible for it to be as the rumors in the marketplace say." In reality, the divine Empress had ruled over the human world for more than 200 years. Although her performance in the war against the demons had been unsatisfactory and her methods against those who opposed her had been excessively cruel, her performance in internal affairs and the livelihood of the people could be described as perfect. Even her opponents had not been able to make too much of a fuss about this. But even today, both inside and outside the imperial court were still seething with resentment towards her. She still had not obtained the sincere respect and love of the most simple and honest common people. A large part of this was because of those evil legends surrounding her, such as the most famous one. It was said that in order to defy the heavens and change her fate, to become the first female emperor of the human world, the divine empress sacrificed all her future children to the starry sky. For the sake of success, she did not even hesitate to personally choke her first son to death, even successfully framing the empress at the time. I also cannot imagine such a terrifying matter, and I will not use rumors to criticize the empress, but you should be well aware that the empress and Emperor Xian have been together for many years, but she truly did not leave behind a single descendant. Qin Chongqing said, "The empress might not have taken the initiative to commit such an evil deed as murdering her children, but it is highly possible that this is the price the heavenly Tao demanded from her, or perhaps a necessary condition for her to defy the heavens and change her fate." Su Yurong asked, "What do you want to say?" Qin Chongqing gazed at the nearby green plains and the distant, vast desert. After a long period of silence, he finally said, "The empress defied the heavens and changed her fate. She still has not succeeded." As his voice fell, the world suddenly darkened. Clouds drifted over from some unknown place and covered the sun. With the roar of thunder, rain began to fall from the sky. In the past 2 days it has rained during the great festival and the temperature has plummeted. In this midsummer, I caught a cold and my rhinitis flared up. 2 years ago, I also had a similar experience, a similar feeling. Today, when I was saving the manuscript, I encountered another problem. I spent more than an hour before finally retrieving the 3,000-character manuscript. I was truly terrified to the point of speechlessness, and my anger almost lasted until dawn. Chapter 602. Although I just learned that the Princess of Ping was the Empress's adopted daughter, I presume that many people, especially those in the capital, already knew of this matter. Everyone else, whether it's the Prince of Xiang's line or the Prince of Zhongshan's, has no blood relationship with the Empress. She has no descendants of her own, and many of the legends about her defying the heavens and changing fate originated from this aspect. Qin Chongqing gazed at the great rivers and mountains and calmly continued. But people have forgotten a very important matter. If that legend is true, then as long as Crown Prince Xiaoming is still alive, the Empress's defying the heavens and changing fate has not succeeded, or at least not ended. Su Yurong thought of those strange movements in the capital over the past 10-some years, and the files that the chief eunuch of the imperial palace had always been secretly investigating. Her elegant brow creased. "This doesn't make sense." Qin Chongqing understood what she meant. The divine empress had already ruled for 200-some years. If she had not succeeded in defying the heavens and changing fate, how could she have ascended to the throne? If defying the heavens and changing fate is not an instantaneous matter, but a long process, like a river, then this makes sense. The divine empress might have hidden dangers that no one knows of. To her, Crown Prince Xiaoming's existence is the greatest danger. Qin Chongqing looked at her and said, "If I am Crown Prince Xiaoming, then my existence is the greatest danger to the Empress. It's only natural that she wants to kill me." Su Yurong's deductive arts were extremely formidable, so she naturally would not miss a single point of doubt. She asked, "If you really are Crown Prince Xiaoming, why did Principal Shang send you to the capital? Was he not worried that the divine Empress would discover your identity? He and the Pope didn't even seem to have any intention of concealing your identity, as if they deliberately wanted the Empress to know of your existence. No question could withstand scrutiny. Even if there were no questions, many questions would still be asked." Qin Chongqing said uncertainly, because I'm much younger than Crown Prince Xiaoming, so this was a very powerful reason. But it also seemed like an excuse, because only the 3 people in Xining Village's old temple knew exactly how old he was. He knew that this would be very difficult to convince. After a moment of silence, he said, "If I am still alive when we reach Jingdo, I will directly ask Uncle." Su Yurong looked at his face and did not see any anxiety or fear. Thinking about how he was so calm during the discussion, she thought to herself that the person she liked was really amazing to be able to be so calm in the face of death. Her heart moved and her actions followed her heart. She leaned on his shoulder and softly said, "You will definitely live." Chen Chongqing looked at her and thought to himself, if he could continue to lean on her like this, it would also be a very blissful thing. But things didn't always go as he wished. Once the Elder of Heavenly Secrets sent the news back to the capital. The Divine Empress would definitely send people to kill him and not allow him to return to the capital alive. Su Yurong did not raise her head to look at his face, but she could clearly sense his concern. Unless the Empress personally acts, who can kill you? Mao Chuyu and Ling Haizhiwang's carriage was in the rear. Mao Chuyu naturally would not let Chen Chongqing die. Although Ling Haizhiwang very much wanted Chen Chongqing to die, he could not just stand by and watch. With these 2 peak star condensation prefects of the orthodoxy at his side, even the most formidable assassin would find it very difficult to get close. But Chen Chongqing was keenly aware that if the Divine Empress was determined to kill him, she would not just send a few assassins. She would assuredly send an army, personally led by divine generals. No matter how strong Mao Chuyu was, how could he protect Chen Chongqing? Just as he was thinking these things, he suddenly saw a red flower in the green plains. This red flower gently swayed among the green branches, sometimes moving and sometimes still. It seemed to have stopped at its original location, but it never left his line of sight. As it turned out, it was actually moving along with the speeding carriage. It was already quite some time before dawn, so there was no dew on the grass or plants of the plains. However, the red flower was covered in morning dew. In the sunlight, it shone with a beautiful luster, a threatening red. Somewhat surprised, he turned to Su Yurong and asked uncertainly, "Bi Yanheng?" Su Yurong nodded, then turned to the distant plains and said, "Guan Xinka should be accompanying us 100 li away." Chen Chongqing was somewhat shocked. A few days ago, when the demon lord entered Mount Han, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had sent messages to all parts of the world. The closest Guan Xinka and the fastest Bianghong had been the first to arrive. Chen Chongqing had not expected that after the demon lord returned to the snowy plains, these 2 powerful figures would not leave Mount Han. Moreover, it seemed that they would escort him all the way back to the capital. Bi Yanghong and Guan Xinka were not ordinary experts. They were supreme experts of the divine domain, ranked among the storms of the 8 directions. Even if Chen Chongqing was the future pope, he still did not have the right to have them accompany him. Their appearance and accompanying him were even more important to demonstrate the intimidating power of the orthodoxy's conservative faction and the faction that supported the imperial clan, a sort of declaration. "The Empress has always had many enemies," Su Yurong said as she gazed at the little red flower in the plains. Chen Chongqing thought to himself, "It seems now that I'm the enemy that the Empress wants to eliminate the most." With 2 storms of the 8 directions accompanying him, no matter what sort of military force the great Zhou imperial court used, it was impossible for them to threaten Chen Chongqing's life. Just as Su Yurong had said, unless the Divine Empress personally acted, Chen Chongqing would be able to very safely return to the capital. Of course, he had to ensure that the illness in his body would not rapidly worsen. The current situation was rather complex, with many riddles that needed to be solved hidden within, as well as many dangers. Every so often, Su Yurong would use the sacred light technique on Chen Chongqing to ensure that the scent of blood in his body would not seep out. For this, she consumed a massive amount of her spiritual sense, causing her face to grow paler and paler. Even so, she did not rest. She seemed calm, but she was actually vigilantly watching the scenery along the way. She arranged for Chen Chongqing to sit in her imperial carriage, not allowing him to take a single step away. Whether it was eating, treating his wounds, resting, or even washing up, everything was done on the imperial carriage. At the same time, she did not allow anyone to take a single step onto the imperial carriage. Everything related to Qin Chongqing was personally handled by her. What to eat and what to drink, when to eat and when to drink, when to sleep, when to wake up, and who to see. It must be known that even Tang 36 and Zhexiu could only come to the imperial carriage every day when they were resting and speak with Qin Chongqing from a distance of several zhang. On a certain evening, Tang 36 came to the imperial carriage. Just like in the past few days, he impatiently waited for a long time before the curtain was finally lifted. Then, not long after he spoke with Chen Chongsheng, Suyurong brought over a bowl of lotus seed porridge and indicated for the South Stream Temple disciples to lower the curtain once more. Through the curtain, one could faintly see Suyurong feeding Qin Chongsheng porridge. Tang 36 was furious and yelled inside, "Are you raising a child? It's not like you're his mother." The expressions of the South Stream Temple disciples instantly changed, and then the clanging of swords filled the air. Tang 36 naturally did not have the courage to compete with the sword array of South Stream Temple, so he resentfully turned and returned to the Orthodox Academy's carriage. In the first few days, Zhexiu would go with him every day to see Qin Chongsheng. Later on, after confirming that there was nothing wrong with Chen Chongsheng, he had no patience to interact with the women of South Stream Temple, nor was he willing to look at those scenes on the imperial carriage, so he never went again. Now, seeing Tang 36's indignant expression, after asking about the matter, he said nothing. "Don't you think it's very strange?" Tang 36 asked. Zhexiu said nothing. He naturally knew that there was something wrong with this matter, but Chen Chongsheng seemed to trust Suyurong a little more, so he could only watch from the side. Many people found it very strange, felt that there was something wrong. From the moment they left Mount Han, many people's gazes had never left the imperial carriage. The mood of the crowd was rather strange, thinking, just what is going on here? It's already been many days. The Holy Maiden and Chen Chongsheng have been together day and night on the imperial carriage. Just what are they doing? By now, many people had already vaguely guessed that perhaps they had been together for a very long time, but they still found it impossible to accept that they were together at all times. This had nothing to do with alignment or stance. They just found it impossible to accept that the Holy Maiden, as pure as ice and pure as jade, would bring a stinky man with her every day. This was truly rather unsightly. The disciples of South Stream Temple would often see her bring tea and water to Qin Chongsheng. There was even a female disciple who had personally seen her wash Qin Chongsheng's body. Even if they were already together, even if he was injured, was there a need for the Holy Maiden to personally serve him? Because of these matters, the atmosphere in the convoy had always been rather strange, and the mood of the South Stream Temple disciples was even more oppressive. Because Suyurong was their temple master, the Holy Maiden they most respected and viewed as a god. On the same night, South Stream Temple disciple Yi Xiaolian took a letter written by Chen Chongsheng and went to the Orthodox Academy's carriage. Chapter 603. Tang 36 opened the letter and realized that Chen Chongsheng heard what he said before and was worried that he would cause trouble, so he gave an explanation. In the letter, he said that his wounds were not serious, but he needed Suyurong to use the sacred light technique to heal him for a long time. Moreover, Suyurong was a little girl after all, so it was normal for her to worry too much. These explanations were reasonable, but they could not convince Tang 36. However, on the journey back to the capital, he would not cause any trouble. He raised his head and prepared to have Yi Xiaolian help him bring a letter back to Qin Chongsheng. But he discovered that this female disciple of South Stream Temple had an unfriendly expression. She stared at him as if she wanted to eat him up. 2 years ago, on the Divine Avenue of Li Palace, He had once berated this little disciple of Holy Maiden Peak to the point where she cried bitterly. To him, this was a very small matter, to the point where he had long forgotten about it. It wasn't until Chun Chong Sheng mentioned this matter that he recalled it and matched her with that little girl from back then. Please don't look at me like that. You were the one who provoked me. I was just defending myself. Tang 36 looked at Yi Xiao Lian sternly and said, "The one who provokes first is cheap. I hope you can agree with this principle." Not to mention whether there was such a principle in the world. But when it came to the word despicable, it was really difficult to find someone who could beat him. Yi Xiaolian was well aware of this point, so she naturally did not respond, only glaring at him. Tang 36 lowered his head and began to write a letter, saying, "Recently the disciples of your South Stream Temple have all been very angry." Yi Xiao Lian thought to herself, anyone who saw the Holy Maiden taking care of Chen Chongsheng for the past few days would not be in a good mood. Tang 36 hastily wrote his reply and handed the letter to her. Seeing her expression, he guessed what she was thinking and said, "He is injured after all. Don't be too stingy." Yi Xiaolian could no longer hold back. "If he's injured, we can take care of him. Why must the temple master personally do it?" Tang 36 thought to himself that this was also the question that he and Zheshio could not understand the most, but he would not bring it up in front of her. He said, "They have an engagement, so it's naturally more convenient." Yes, there was an engagement. Yi Xiaolian very seriously corrected. The engagement has already been annulled, and it was annulled by Chun Chongsheng himself. No matter who looks at them, they look like a loving couple. No one would be able to imagine that their engagement had already been cancelled. Mao Chuyu and Ling Haizhuang stood on the grassland by the road, gazing at the great imperial carriage in front of them. Ling Haizhuang glanced at Mao Chuyu, wanting to confirm if there was some deeper meaning behind his sudden words. Mao Chuyu looked at him and said calmly, "The current situation is very clear. The Holy Maiden will probably marry Qin Chongsheng. Are you prepared?" Ling Haizhuang said nothing, his face rather gloomy. At this level, there was naturally no one that dared to demand Su Yurong with the secular standard of following her husband after marriage. However, if Su Yurong really did marry Qin Chongsheng, there was no reason for her to be his enemy. He thought of the change in Su Yurong's attitude on Mount Han and felt a slight chill. Starting many years ago, Holy Maiden Peak had been the Divine Empress's ally in the south. The Divine Empress had pushed for the confluence of the north and south, receiving much assistance from the previous Holy Maiden. Coupled with the fact that the entire world knew that the Divine Empress treated Su Yurong like her own daughter, anyone could see that this situation would not change for a very long time. But what if this generation's Holy Maiden really did marry Qin Chongsheng? Would Holy Maiden Peak continue to support the Divine Empress? Just as Su Yurong had said, the 10,000 li journey from Mount Han to the capital was very peaceful, with no problems encountered. Under the accompaniment of the vast sky of stars, a convoy of several dozen carriages entered the capital. The red flower that had been swaying in the plains for a very long time quietly vanished. Even further away, the man wearing the bamboo hat had gone to some high mountain to pick up the wild pleasures of stargazing. Upon entering the capital, the convoy did not split up. They did not go to the Orthodox Academy, to the Imperial Palace, or to the Divine General of the East's estate. Instead, they all went to the Li Palace. Mao Chuyu and Ling Haizhuang stood beneath the pine trees on either side of the divine path. They did not look at each other, but both gazed at the end of the divine path. Besides them, people like Tang 36 would not even have the chance to step onto the divine path. Su Yurong pushed the wheelchair Qin Chongsheng along the divine path to that quiet hall in the deepest depths of the Li Palace. The Pope stood on the stone steps in front of the hall to welcome them. This was out of respect for the southern faction of the Orthodoxy, Holy Maiden Peak, and also because he was very worried. Qin Chongsheng sat in the wheelchair, a gray wool blanket draped over his body. He looked very much like a sick person. In reality, his complexion was very good. He seemed full of vigor and extremely healthy, not at all like a sick person. Su Yurong was not surprised to see the Pope standing outside the hall. Her hands did not leave the wheelchair as she bowed. Chen Chongsheng said to her, "I have some things to say to Martial Uncle. Go somewhere else and wait for me." Su Yurong fell quiet for a while, but in the end, she did not reject his decision. She turned and walked towards the nearby hall. The priest standing guard outside the hall knew of her identity, and naturally did not dare to stop her. However, they could not help but show some shock in their eyes. After bowing, they hurriedly dispersed to notify the Pope. Su Yurong paid no attention to their gazes and expressionlessly walked into the hall. The space within this palace was extremely large and grand. The stone walls were engraved with countless classic stories from the Taoist canon, as well as many statues of virtuous predecessors. This was the Orthodoxy's Great Hall, the Great Hall of Light. The Orthodoxy was divided into the North and the South. The North respected the Pope, while the South respected the Holy Maiden. Over the countless years, the two factions had fought both openly and covertly, with countless stories to tell. Later on, as the situation gradually calmed down, several holy maidens of the South visited the capital. After all, they were of the same lineage, so they would naturally live in the Li Palace. However, since the North and the South were different, those holy maidens had never stepped into the Great Hall of Light. When Su Yurong was young, she would often play in the Imperial Palace and the Li Palace. She would also sneak into the Great Hall of Light to play hide-and-seek. But now that she was the Holy Maiden of the South, stepping into the Great Hall of Light had a completely different meaning. Upon hearing the news, Taoist Siwen hurried over with several cardinals, wanting to show her around. His attitude was very respectful. "You don't need to pay attention to me. I just want to be quiet here," Su Yurong said. Taoist Siwen and the cardinals were speechless. They thought, if you just want to be quiet, why must you come here? Could it be that you don't know what kind of shock it would cause if the people of the world knew that the Holy Maiden of the South had finally stepped into the Great Hall of Light? Su Yurong said no more. She held her hands behind her back and quietly stood at the base of the altar, gazing at the mural that towered over 30 zhang. It was impossible to tell what she was thinking. Taoist Siwen was helpless. He could only lead the cardinals out of the Great Hall of Light and wait outside. Even though it was late at night, the Great Hall of Light was still brightly lit. Countless gentle rays of light seeped out from the pillars, walls, and statues. Su Yurong stood in the light. Perhaps it was because the light was too bright, but her face was rather pale. Chapter 604. On the 10,000 li journey south, Su Yurong would at intervals use the sacred light technique on Chen Chongsheng, isolating his qi from this world. As they passed through Beishan County, she had even given Chen Chongsheng 2 transfusions of blood. Whether it was her mind, her true essence, or her most precious heavenly phoenix, true blood and sacred light, she had already consumed far too much of it. Moreover, in Mount Han, in order to save Chen Chongsheng, she had forcefully received the sword of the heavenly Tao and had already suffered significant injuries. But she still could not rest. At this time, she quietly stood in the Great Hall of Light because this place could allow her to recover faster, especially since she could obtain the replenishment of the sacred light. Moreover, this place was the closest to that place, only separated by a wall. If something happened, she could blast through that wall in the shortest amount of time and rush over. At this time, the Pope and Qin Chongsheng were talking. The many stars in the sky made the capital seem to be shrouded in a silvery, watery light. Eaves could be seen everywhere in the depths of the Li Palace, so it still retained more of the darkness. Qin Chongsheng lifted the blanket, but he did not stand up from his wheelchair. He lowered his head and very earnestly folded the blanket into a small square. Then he raised his head and asked the Pope, "Martial Uncle, just who am I?" He had asked this question to the Elder of Heavenly Secrets. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets had given him a very certain answer, but it was not accurate enough. The Pope calmly gazed at him for a very long time. Just when Chen Chongqing believed that it would be the same as before, that he would still be unable to obtain an accurate answer, the Pope slowly spoke. At the very beginning, when I received your master's letter, I believed that you were my martial nephew who had come to the capital to treat his illness. Treating illness is to cultivate the body, and your cultivation is to follow your heart. So I did not appear. Hearing these words, Qin Chongqing thought of those things that had happened 2.5 years ago when he first entered the capital. He faintly understood that before he entered the Orthodox Academy, his master's letter had arrived in the capital. The Pope walked behind him and pushed the wheelchair into the hall. On both sides of the stone steps was a ramp carved with a pattern of flowing clouds. The wheels of the wheelchair rolled over it, emitting an extremely rhythmic creak. It was just like the Pope's voice at this moment, calm but tinged with sorrow. Only later on did Mei Lisha find me. Only then did I know that he had also received a letter. The night hall was very quiet. The clear water in the pond reflected the starlight, sprinkling mottled clear light on the stone walls and pillars. The lush green leaves in the pot swayed gently, so beautiful that it was almost enchanting. To be honest, I still don't know what your master wants to do. The Pope released the wheelchair and walked to the edge of the pool. Picking up a wooden ladle, he scooped up half a ladle of water and began to water the green leaves. Starlight descended from the glass on the roof of the hall, falling upon the Pope's hemp robe as if writing down countless incomprehensible runes. Qin Chongqing looked at his slightly bowed body and asked after a moment of silence, "If you don't know what he wants to do, then why did you help him?" "I know very well that what you want to know the most is why your master sent you to the capital if you really are Crown Prince Xiaoming." The clear water in the wooden ladle fell into the basin with a gurgling sound, but it did not drown out the Pope's voice. It was more like a background noise. What your master wants to do in his life is very simple: to invite Tianhai down from the imperial throne, or perhaps to drive him down, so that the imperial throne can return to the Qin clan. I think he definitely had this in mind when he sent you to the capital. Today, I can already faintly guess at your master's intentions, but I can't be sure. In the bloody incident of the Orthodox Academy, everyone said that it was Marshal Uncle who personally killed my master. Now that I look at it, it's naturally not true. The Pope's voice was as clear and gentle as flowing water. The Orthodoxy only has me and your master, so how could I have the heart to kill him? Moreover, although he was heavily injured by Tianhai in the imperial palace, killing him was not so easy. I originally thought that this matter would forever remain hidden, but I didn't expect that you would come to the capital. Qin Chongqing replied, "Because I came to the capital because of my master's letter, because Sir wanted to take care of me. The divine empress will very easily find out that my master is still alive. Everyone says that the elder of heavenly secrets can see through the heavenly Tao, that black robe schemes are unparalleled, but in truth, your master is the true schemer. Putting aside his true goal in sending you to the capital, just the fact that he intentionally let Tianhai know that he is still alive is tantamount to tearing open a crack between me and Tianhai, and this crack will only grow larger and larger. Since this crack cannot be mended, the suspicion between Sir and the divine empress will eventually turn into enmity. Yes, once there is enmity, once one senses the other's enmity, then when they stand opposite each other, they will become enemies. Doesn't this mean that Master is using the kindness Sir showed him back then to force Sir to stand on his side?" Qin Chongqing gazed at the Pope's back and realized that he was becoming more and more stooped, more and more like a tired old man. His voice subconsciously became downcast, just like his current mood. The Pope's voice, however, remained calm. "I said before, your master is the true schemer. In his view, in order to achieve his goal, anything can be sacrificed." Hearing these words, Qin Chongqing's mood became even more downcast. Why is it like this? The Pope's hand released the handle of the wooden ladle and picked up a dry towel by the basin to wipe his hands. Back then, I had a falling out with your master because we had a different view of this world. Now, your master has used all his methods to force me to stand on his side, but I can calmly accept it. This is because time has changed many things. Tianhai and I already have a different view of this world. Qin Changsheng recalled the conversation he had had in this dark hall after leaving the mausoleum of books. I also now believe that Tianhai should abdicate. The Pope's voice resounded through the dark hall. It was not very loud, but in the extremely distant night sky, it seemed like a clap of thunder. The hall was silent, except for the sound of the wooden ladle suspended in the air pouring water into the green leaf. After some time had passed, Qin Changsheng spoke again. Then what about me? Just what sort of role am I playing? You and Archbishop Melisha have taken such care of me these past 2 years. Just why? I can only guess at your master's thoughts. Melisha probably knows a little more. But you must believe that this old man who has already returned to the Sea of Stars will not have any thoughts of harming you. His thoughts are not completely the same as your master's. He insists that in this process you will suffer many injuries, but you will also obtain many benefits. Benefits? Melisha believes that only through this method can your illness be cured. Can my illness be cured? Qin Changsheng's voice began to tremble. The Pope walked up to the wheelchair and looked into his eyes. His voice was as calm as water. Even fate can be changed, much less an illness? Qin Changsheng very quickly calmed down. He looked at the Pope and seriously asked, "Martial uncle, you already knew that I was ill?" The Pope replied, "Yes." Qin Changsheng's expression became even more serious. "Then, did you also know of that matter?" This was the deepest part of the Li Palace, the most secluded, even gloomy. Only the colored glass at the top of the hall allowed some starlight to shine down. He sat on the wheelchair, the wool blanket neatly folded into small cubes placed on the side of his legs. His clothes were thin. Time passed, and the stars moved. At some point, the brightest star in the night sky, the dragon stallion, had arrived above the hall. Starlight pierced through the glass and fell upon his body. Starlight was even softer than snowflakes, and when it fell, it was naturally noiseless. Yet, for some reason, there seemed to be a slight hiss, as if something had been ignited. This was Qin Changsheng borrowing the starlight to ignite the little remaining star radiance in his body. All the meridians in his body had already been severed. Whether it was the true essence produced in his ethereal palace or the snowy plains, there was no place for it to flow, so it charged around. Very quickly his body began to heat up. His face, neck, and even his hands, which were exposed outside his clothes, all became somewhat red. If one looked at it with their eyes, it would be a light pink, but in his body it was a blood red, because it represented that his body was currently bleeding from the inside. As his body temperature grew higher and higher, his skin grew redder and redder, already transforming from an illusion of health into a strange and demonic demon. At the same time, an extremely faint qi emerged from the countless pores on his body and from his facial features. Drifting in the night wind, it arrived in front of the Pope. The Pope's expression suddenly changed. The boundless starlight in his deep and serene eyes instantly transformed into a raging river of stars. In those two eyes, there was no longer any benevolence, only a powerful apathy and a callous will. Chapter 605. Do you know what you're doing? The voice seeped out from the Pope's lips. It was no longer like the sound of water from before, so cold and bone-chilling. Qin Changsheng looked into his eyes and solemnly said, "I know very well what I'm doing." He appeared very calm, but he was actually very nervous. The hand gripping the armrest of the wheelchair was faintly trembling, and even the blood on his face seemed to have faded from his emotions. He had not used the blazing sword. He had controlled his true essence to a certain extent so that the true blood would not seep out of his body too quickly. But the Pope was one of the world's supreme experts. At such a close distance, he could naturally smell the scent of his blood. The sea of stars in the Pope's eyes had already become a raging river of stars. Qin Changxing was taking a risk to his life, a risk that even exceeded this level of danger. He was doing it on purpose. It was impossible to know his master's intentions. His martial uncle, the Pope, was his most important elder in the world, but also the person he could least trust. The Pope had said earlier that Archbishop Melisha had no ill will towards him. But what about him? He had to clearly know what the Pope's attitude towards him was, whether he had good or bad will towards him. If the Pope harbored evil intentions towards him, then the greatest benefit he could obtain from him was to eat him. This sort of temptation and desire was far more important than the imperial throne, far more important than power. Just what would the Pope do? He calmly gazed at the raging river of stars in the Pope's eyes. His nervousness gradually dissipated, leaving behind only calm, true calm. The Pope gazed at him, the raging river of stars in his eyes growing more and more terrifying, like it could swallow up the entire world at any moment. Su Yurong stood in the light, calmly gazing at the mural on the wall. She raised her head but not looked up. This mural depicted the 12 sages. These 12 sages were not all saints, but they had played extremely important roles in the history of the orthodoxy. Their status is even higher than the saints. It was said that this stone wall, several dozen zhang high, and the materials used to paint it, had been mixed with fragments of heavenstone. As long as there was a single source of light from the outside world, it could produce an infinite radiance. So whether it was day or night, this place would always be so bright and solemn. Suddenly, the light in the hall grew even brighter, even somewhat dazzling. Su Yurong slightly narrowed her eyes, her beautiful eyes like willow leaves, but also like the edge of a sword. She felt the violent energy in the light and opened her arms. With 2 light claps, the Tong Bao was gripped in her left hand and the temple sword in her right. Whoosh! A pair of pure white wings unfurled behind her, slowly fluttering. Other than the 12 sages, there were also many saints and oracles. The divine emissary at the highest point had an indifferent expression, but his eyes were extremely tyrannical, as if he couldn't wait to devour all life in front of him. The messenger of God was destroyed. Looking at the oracle in the mural, Su Yorong's expression was calm. After standing in the light palace for a period of time, she had not completely recovered from the injuries in her body, nor had she recovered her true yuan and holy light. But she was already prepared for battle. She had already forcefully raised her cultivation to its peak. The Tong Bao was on her left, the temple sword on her right, and her wings were flying. If the battle truly began, she would burn her heavenly phoenix true blood at all costs. Although she still had not reached star condensation in her current state, even if Guanbai used his strongest heavenly Tao sword, he would still not necessarily be a match for her. But in this battle, her opponent was not Guanbai, nor was it the divine emissary in charge of destruction in the murals, but the old man behind the murals. That old man was the supreme expert of this world, separated from the great hall of light by a single wall. The Pope stood in front of his wheelchair, gazing at Qin Changxing, the rivers of stars violently surging in his eyes. The expression on his face was abnormally indifferent, like that of a heartless and ignorant god. Qin Changxing knew that this was the most crucial moment, so his mind actually relaxed. The truth was hidden behind the darkness. With his intelligence, he could not clearly see it, so he chose to use the crudest method to tear apart the curtain of night, even if it was only a corner. Suddenly, the sound of water stopped. Previously, clear water had been incessantly falling from the wooden ladle suspended in the air into the green leaf in the basin. Qin Changxing had seen the Pope water the green leaf several times before, so he knew that the water in that wooden ladle was seemingly endless. But today, the water in that wooden ladle seemed to be empty. The moment the sound of water stopped, the Pope's body slightly trembled. Those marks of starlight that had fallen on his hemp clothes, like incomprehensible runes, had also become deformed and somewhat indistinct. In that instant, The raging rivers of stars in the depths of the Pope's eyes also froze for a moment. The wind lightly ruffled the green leaf, and the starlight illuminated the night sky. How many truths of history were hidden in his aged wrinkles! Gradually deepening, the Pope closed his eyes. Daoist Siuan, several cardinals, and even more priests of the Li Palace were currently outside the great hall of light. They had already sensed the abnormality within the hall, especially the violent energy seeping out of the rays of light, which made their hearts tremble in fear. In this sacred radiance, they could faintly make out a pair of pure white wings unfurling from Su Yurong's back. To be able to personally witness the advancement and awakening of the legendary Heavenly Phoenix bloodline should have been an extremely shocking matter. But at this moment, they found it impossible to experience this sort of feeling, because they knew that something major was about to happen. Daoist Siuan could no longer remain where he was. His face cold, he charged into the myriad rays of light in the hall. As a prefect of the Orthodoxy, he possessed the supreme strength of a peak star condensation cultivator, only half a step from the divine domain. Those rays of light suffused with violent energy could not stop his steps. But when he reached the depths of the hall, he did not know what he should do. He vaguely knew that something major was about to happen, but he did not know what it was. Her pure white wings slowly flapped. Su Yurong's left hand gripped her bow, and her right hand gripped her sword. Her calm expression concealed the solemnity of facing a great foe, but in the end she did nothing. Daoist Siuan could not possibly strike first in this sort of situation. It must be known that Su Yurong was the Holy Maiden of the South, possessing the same status in the Orthodoxy as the Pope. If he struck first without asking the reason, it would be the greatest disrespect, even the most heinous of crimes. Su Yurong truly did nothing. She only quietly gazed at the mural on the stone wall. She could clearly sense that although the light seeping out of the mural was still blazing, that violent feeling was gradually returning to silence. She quietly gazed at the mural, and the people in the mural also quietly gazed back at her. Besides the god of destruction's emissary and the saints in the clouds, there were also the 12 sages standing on the ground, pitying the suffering of the common people. The eyes of those sages were clear and bright, their expressions gentle and benevolent. The Pope opened his eyes. The violent river of stars in the depths of his eyes had already vanished, and the vast sea of stars could no longer be seen. His eyes were clear and bright. His eyes were so clear and bright, his expression so gentle and compassionate. He turned and walked to the green leaf in the basin. He took the wooden ladle from the air, scooped some water from the pool, and poured it into the basin. The green leaf, which had turned somewhat yellow from the violent chi, instantly regained a threatening green. The Pope scooped another ladle of water from the pool and poured it over his body, drenching him from head to toe. He scooped another ladle of water and walked to the wheelchair. Beads of water dripped down from his white hair. His soaked hemp clothes stuck to his body, revealing his old and withered body. With a splash, the Pope poured all the water in the wooden ladle over Chun Chongqing's head. The night hall was gloomy and rarely saw sunlight, so the chill of the water in the pool was difficult to dispel. Chun Chongqing shuddered, and his entire body was drenched. A faint steam rose from his body, but before it could get far, the Pope lightly waved his sleeve and scattered it into nothingness. His scalding body instantly returned to its normal temperature, and the blood that had been seeping out of his body was also suppressed. The Pope returned the wooden ladle to its original place, took out 2 dry towels, and gave one to Qin Chongsheng. "I now know why your master gave you the name Chongsheng," the Pope said to Qin Chongsheng as he wiped away the water on his face. Qin Chongsheng wiped his face, saying nothing. As expected, eating you might allow one to obtain Chongsheng. The Pope's voice was very indifferent. Qin Chongsheng looked at the slightly wet towel in his hand and said, "Master said that it was because of the divine soul entering the essence blood, but in truth, I don't really believe it. Everyone has a divine soul, so who can be so moving? What makes you different is that your body possesses countless strands of sacred light. The Pope looked at him, his gaze extremely distant, like he was looking at another world. Chapter 606. Sacred Light. Qin Changsheng appeared perplexed. He naturally knew what sacred light was, but although he was well versed in the Taoist canon, he had never entered the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, nor had he gone to Holy Maiden Peak. So why was his body brimming with sacred light? Suddenly he recalled a name. It was a place rarely mentioned, not even clearly recorded in the Taoist canon. The first time he had truly heard the name of this place was on that snowy day at the beginning of the year, when he and Su Yurong were discussing where Senior Su Li would go. As expected, in the next moment, he once more heard this name from the Pope's words. Could it be that your master really went to the sacred light continent? The Pope slightly creased his brow as if he had encountered a problem that was very difficult to understand. But this is also not completely certain. There's always been a rumor that a portion of the descendants of the cloud grave passed through the barrier of space and went to the sacred light continent. Emperor Taizong had no way of exterminating them, so he stopped his search. If that branch of the Chan imperial clan really is living on that side, then your situation can be explained. Qin Changsheng finally understood that the sacred light continent was not an illusory existence. There might even be people who had gone there, and those people were highly likely to be his clansmen, but there were still some questions that he could not understand. Could it be that the people living on the sacred light continent all have so much sacred light in their bodies? It's rumored that the world of the sacred light continent is brimming with limitless sacred light, but the situation you speak of is still impossible. Your situation is still special. The Pope looked at him with pity. When you were still in your mother's womb, your son Will was already destroyed. Logically speaking, it should have been impossible for you to survive. According to my conjecture, it was probably some eccentric person on the sacred light continent who gathered an unimaginable amount of sacred light and forcefully poured it into your body, helping you survive. After a moment of silence, Chen Changxing said, "Living is rather arduous, but living is still a good thing." The Pope extended a hand and caressed his head. "Go. If you still don't leave, I'm truly worried that the Holy Maiden will burn down the Great Hall of Light." Chen Changxing lowered his head, accepting the old man's loving blessing. The hard stone floor resounded with the grinding of wheels as he pushed his wheelchair out of the hall. The Pope gazed at his back and said, "In the future, do not use this method to probe. It's very dangerous." Qin Changsheng stopped the wheelchair and nodded after a moment of silence. Neither human nature nor the human heart can be tested, because when you start thinking of ways to test it, it means that you have already begun to doubt it. The Pope concluded, "And doubt is the root of all misfortune." It was early autumn and not yet bleak. The big banyan tree by the lake was still swaying its green leaves. Only some yellowish leaves could be seen occasionally on the lawn. The Orthodox Academy was heavily guarded today, the Orthodoxy cavalry vigilantly patrolling outside the alley. Those restaurants outside the alley that were normally brightly lit had also received the news and closed their doors early, leaving the place deserted. The disciples of South Stream Temple did not remain in the Li Palace, nor did they go to the Imperial Palace. Instead, they went straight to the Orthodox Academy and began to pitch tents on the lawn. At the same time, they impolitely took over the library. The teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy were blocked outside by a curtain of cloth. As they watched those beautiful disciples of South Stream Temple enter and leave, they actually did not feel too conflicted. They were even secretly happy, but they did not show it on their faces. They indignantly grumbled. When did the Orthodox Academy come under the control of Holy Maiden Peak? At this time, Su Mou and Xin Yuan Po were in the kitchen on the other side of the lake that had just been repaired for less than half a year. According to the disciples of South Stream Temple, they could not return to the small building for the time being. Only when they were allowed could they return and take their clothes and daily necessities. This naturally made them very angry. Just what happened? Why do the people of Holy Maiden Peak have to live in the academy? And they even want to steal our place, so where are we going to live? Zheshio sat on the door-sill of the kitchen, looking at the newly planted locust trees by the wall. As usual, he feigned loneliness and despair. The person who answered this question could only be Tang, 36. There is one thing that you might not know, but I believe that you will know very soon, just like everyone else in this world. He looked at Su Mou and Xian Yuanpa and said very seriously, Qin Chongxing has had an affair with Su Yurong for a long time. These words were very vulgar, but it was the clearest way to explain the current situation. Silence. Su Mou and Xian Yuanpa needed a lot of time to digest the shock in their hearts. Su Mou's first reaction was to frown at Tang 36. How can you use such vulgar words on the Holy Maiden? Xian Yuanpo's reaction was also very direct, his face full of praise. The principal is truly amazing, but what about Her Highness? This time it was Tang, 36's turn to be shocked. He looked at the two and said, Are you not disappointed, not angry? Why should we be disappointed? That adulterous couple kept us in the dark for so long. Tang, I'm warning you. This matter involves the Holy Maiden. Don't use such vulgar words. Su Mou said seriously. Tang 36 said angrily, You were already kicked out of the door, and you still want to speak up for them? Xian Yuanpa said with a simple and honest face. This is equivalent to a new wife bringing her family to visit for the first time. Of course, we have to treat them well. Chen Chongsheng and Su Yurong didn't know that they had once again become a pair of adulterous couple in Tang 36's mouth. They were currently discussing their previous trip to Li Palace. Suspicion is the source of all misfortune. These were the last words Martial Uncle said to me. I know that this was a teaching for me, but I think that when he said these words, he might have remembered that when Teacher sent me to the capital, it was also a thorn inserted between him and the Divine Empress. Then, to him, this was also a sort of misfortune. His Holiness, the Pope's heart is for the world. The misfortune, he feels, should be more of the misfortune of the world, the misfortune of the millions upon millions of people. But to be used by Teacher like this, even if Martial Uncle truly believed that the Divine Empress should abdicate, he would still feel somewhat uncomfortable. That's why I say, your teacher truly is a schemer. Right now, I really want to know just what sort of person he really is. Su Yurong withdrew her gaze from the distance and looked at Qin Chongsheng. The starlight and the early autumn wind came in through the window and fell on his face. It was very comfortable, just like the feeling he gave others. She didn't know what sort of person Taoist Ji, or perhaps Principal Shang, was. She only knew that she had never loathed a person so much, even though that person was Qin Chongsheng's teacher. It was precisely because that person was Qin Chongsheng's teacher. Who in the world would be so cold and heartless as to use the student he had brought up as a chess piece, and was even unwilling to let his senior brother, who had once spared his life, go? Qin Chongsheng thought of the words recorded in Wang Ji's notebook in the Pavilion of Ascending Mist. Wang Ji's notebook did not specifically mention Taoist Ji. He only described how he had gone to visit a few ministers and famous generals of the Pavilion of Ascending Mist before they died of illness. He had either encountered or heard of Taoist Ji's visit. As the divine doctor with the best medical skills in the great Zhou dynasty, when those ministers and famous generals were gravely ill, he would receive orders to visit them. This seemed to be a very normal matter. But thinking about it from another perspective, it could also be said that not long after Taoist Ji had gone to visit those ministers and famous generals on Emperor Taizong's orders, those important figures whose names would go down in history returned to the Sea of Stars. And if one thought about it, Taoist Ji was a legitimate successor of the orthodoxy. Many years later, he would restore Shang Xingzhou's real name and take charge of the Orthodox Academy, secretly plotting to overthrow the Divine Empress's rule. I think Teacher should have been the person Emperor Taizong trusted the most. After Qin Chongsheng said this, He suddenly felt that the autumn wind blowing in through the window was rather cold. The room was quiet for a very long time. If this matter really was traced back to Taizong's era, if it really was extended to that distant, unknown continent, then it was far too complicated. Although he and she were not ordinary youths, they would still only be 17 in 2 months. They did not know what had happened back then. So how could they see through these layers of fog? Right now, we can only be sure that His Holiness the Pope has no ill intentions towards you, Su Yurong said. Qin Changsheng nodded his head. This was a fact that he had taken an enormous risk to confirm. But in truth, he still could not completely understand why the Pope had stopped at that moment. If it really was, as the Pope said, that his body contained countless strands of sacred light, then eating him would allow him to enter an unimaginable realm and obtain true freedom, transcending the suffering of life and death. Even the demon lord was willing to risk entering Mount Han to eat him. So how could the Pope control him? Senior Yurin had said that only saints could resist the temptation of his blood. What he said, here was ability, not will. If it were Chen Changsheng in this situation, he did not know what choice he would make. In the Pope's heart, what was more important than this? Of course, it was not power. He silently thought that it could only be the future of the human race. Su Yurong knew what he was thinking and said, "It's also because of reverence." For an important figure like the Pope, whether it was in terms of cultivation, strength, or status, what else could there be reverence? The starry sky that the people of the world could see when they raised their heads, as well as that light in the depths of their hearts. That light might be morality or principles or love or familial love, or a bowl of noodles with fried eggs, or the blood in one's body. It was thick for you and thick for me. Not everyone could maintain this kind of reverence. Su Yurong believed that Chen Changsheng's teacher did not. Even at the highest heights, he still maintained reverence in his heart. This sort of person was truly extraordinary. From start to finish, from the heavens to the earth, from light to darkness, without reverence, this sort of person was truly terrifying. Up until now, that person had always been hiding in the shadows. They only knew that he would assuredly use Qin Changsheng, but they did not know how he would use Qin Changsheng. I still adhere to the view I had in Mount Han. Su Yurong said, "We should tell everything to the Empress." Qin Changsheng quietly gazed out the window, saying nothing for a very long time. Chapter 607. Putting aside the Pope for the moment and putting aside his senior brother between his teacher and the divine Empress, who did Qin Changsheng trust more? Not too long ago, he would not even need to think to give an answer, but now, after a very long period of reflection, he could only dejectedly realize that he trusted no one. He had never met the divine Empress, but he had a little understanding of her through MOU, Su Yurong and Prince Jinlu. Of course, he had read far too many records concerning the divine Empress in books. He knew just how powerful and callous that woman who possessed the highest authority in the world was. Now that he thought about it, his teacher might also have been this sort of person. Or perhaps the higher one's cultivation, the fewer things one cared about and the more indifferent one would become to the world. After stepping into the divine domain, one could no longer be considered a mortal, so one naturally would not possess too many of the emotions of mortals. If we really do as you say, the divine Empress and the Pope will no longer have any leeway for a buffer. Even if everyone has been deceiving themselves in these last 2 years, there will always be some reason for deceiving themselves. The conflict between the imperial court and the orthodoxy will rapidly intensify, and perhaps the capital will fall into chaos tomorrow. Chen Changsheng looked at her and said, "I am not Wang Pe, able to continue to treat the world as my responsibility even after my family is destroyed. But if the world falls into chaos because of me, I will still feel a great deal of psychological pressure. Moreover, if I really am Crown Prince Xiaoming, I cannot imagine any reason for the Empress to let me go. If you really are Crown Prince Xiaoming, then the Empress is your birth mother." Su Yurong looked at his calm expression and knew that these words were not enough to convince him. Not even these words were enough to convince herself. A person like the Divine Empress would probably find it very difficult to be bound by these so-called family ties. She gazed at the autumn trees outside the window and said, "I will plead on your behalf. If the Empress really does want to kill me, whose pleading will be of any use? And I think that she knows everything now." Chen Chongsheng stood up and walked to the window, standing shoulder to shoulder with her. On the 10,000-li journey back from Mount Han, under Su Yurong's meticulous care, his injuries had not improved, but they had not temporarily worsened either. Under the effect of the heavenly phoenix's true blood, he had even recovered some strength. The starlight shone on Su Yurong's beautiful face, making it seem even paler. I have to find a way to resolve this. In truth, there is a very simple method. What method? Regardless of what kind of conspiracy master is plotting, it must have something to do with me. Since that's the case, if I disappear, these things will naturally disappear as well. The bubbles on the surface of the lake reflected the starlight, beautiful and illusory, but in fact, the extremely thin walls of those bubbles were all water. If there was no water, the bubbles would naturally not exist. Su Yurong vaguely guessed what he wanted to say. To people like the Divine Empress and Taoist Ji, wanting to disappear before their eyes was an extremely difficult task. There was only one situation, and that was one that neither the Divine Empress nor Taoist Ji could resolve. That was to truly leave this world. His soul returned to the sea of stars, and his body turned into dust. Death. In the days since I left Mount Han, I've actually been thinking perhaps I was originally a person that should not have survived. If I were Crown Prince Xiaoming, then according to the Empress's theory of defying the heavens and changing fate as a sacrifice to the starry sky, I simply should not have been born. Perhaps it was precisely for this reason that when I was still in my mother's womb, before I could even open my eyes, the sun wheel in my body collapsed, but for some reason I did not die. A person that should have died long ago lived for tensome years. This in itself defied the heavenly Tao, so it would naturally throw the human world into chaos. Although I'm late by tensome years, if I die now, perhaps it can be considered a sort of remedy, just like building a new wall for the sheep pen. If I die, these schemes will all be useless. These conflicts also seem to have no meaning. All that remains is peace, and that's pretty good. Chen Chongqing stared into Su Yurong's eyes and spoke with extreme seriousness. He did not speak quickly, doing his utmost to enunciate each word as clearly as possible, ensuring that his thoughts could be heard. Su Yurong heard and confirmed his meaning. Her expression remained calm, but her voice sank, tinged with anger. "I won't let you die. You understand. Even if I don't want to die, I will still die in the end. It's just a matter of a few dozen days sooner or a few dozen days later." Chen Chongsheng looked at her and earnestly explained. In his long conversation with the Pope in the Li Palace, he spoke of the story from 1,000 years ago, spoke of the other continent countless li away, spoke of his illness, but did not speak in detail, much less discuss how to cure it. It was already very clear that not even the Pope could cure his illness. Perhaps it was because he had been pondering this matter ever since he was 10 years old. But when this matter truly appeared before his eyes, Chen Chongqing did not feel any fear. Perhaps he had become numb? He thought in his heart. At this moment he was very seriously pondering. Since he was going to die, then what he should do before he died, how he should die. At most, it would be a difference of a few dozen days. Dying early or late was not important. What was important was when he would die. His meridians would wither, his blood would run dry, or would he be eaten by those supreme experts of the world? How he died was not important. What was important was that he himself decided. He cultivated the Tao of following his heart. If life could not go as he wished, then he naturally had to care about the end. As he thought of these questions, his eyes grew brighter and brighter. Looking into his eyes, Su Yurong confirmed his intentions, and her heart was slightly grieved. "I won't let you die," she said. In Mount Han on the journey, and just now, she would often say to Chen Chongsheng, "I won't let you die." At this time she would say, "I won't let you die." These two sentences were only separated by a single word, but they had completely different meanings, representing completely different moods. Normally, when a girl said these words, the rims of their eyes would often turn red, and they would even be choking with sobs. But Su Yorong remained very calm, even deliberately indifferent. But not even she noticed that when she said these words, her voice was slightly trembling. This was the deepest despair. In the entire continent, only 5 people knew that Chen Chongqing was about to die. To the ordinary people of the capital, this was just a very ordinary day in early autumn. They lived their lives as usual, working and eating, walking and looking, drinking and chatting. When they saw the carriage of a noble family crash into a stone lion, they would go and watch the spectacle. When they heard some gossip, they would begin to enthusiastically express their opinions. On this ordinary autumn day, a shocking piece of news spread through the entire capital, attracting the attention of all the people. Many people had already known yesterday that the party from Holy Maiden Peak and the Orthodoxy's party had come to the capital together. But only this morning did they know that the Holy Maiden had not lived in the Li Palace, nor had she lived in the Imperial Palace, nor had she returned to the Divine General of the East's estate. Instead, she had gone directly to the Orthodox Academy. Moreover, it was said that she had stayed in the Orthodox Academy for an entire night. The Holy Maiden definitely stayed in the Orthodox Academy for an entire night. A pawnbroker stood in front of his shop, waving his arms as he loudly declared. His expression was extremely solemn, as if he was narrating a scripture of the orthodoxy. No one could quickly accept this sort of matter, especially those young men. Whether they were scholars or laborers, the people surrounding the shop all had very unsightly expressions. Chapter 608. Someone looked at the pawnbroker who was spitting saliva and angrily yelled, "Which eye of yours saw that?" The pawnbroker looked at him with disdain and said, "My brother-in-law's nephew is studying in the Orthodox Academy. South Stream Temple has so many disciples living there. How could they not see it? Not only him. Many people clearly saw that the Holy Maiden and Chen Chongsheng were standing by the window upstairs and chatting." The street became quiet. On a starry night, a young man and woman, standing by the window, leaving behind their silhouettes, was a very beautiful scene. Yet, no one was willing to cheer for this scene. After an unknown period of time, the crowd finally came back to their senses. They were shocked and confused. Since last year, it had been rumored that Chen Chongqing had forcefully annulled the engagement with the Su family. Although after the battle on the Bridge of Helplessness, Chen Chongsheng seemed to have changed his mind. But did the Holy Maiden really forgive him so easily? She was just going to live in the Orthodox Academy. Was she really going to marry him? What face would the Su estate have? Wouldn't the Divine General of the East Sushir Ji, famed for his cold and stern eyes, become a joke? In the early morning, Tang 36, Xianyuan Pa, and Su Mou, accompanied by the disciples of South Stream Temple, entered the small building to retrieve their luggage, preparing to move to the east side of the Orthodox Academy. Zhexiu would not do such a thing. His rather shabby luggage was carried by Xianyuan Pa. They stood in front of the closed door, carrying their luggage, looking rather pitiful. You have to leave him some face, after all. This is the Orthodox Academy, and he is the principal. Tang 36 shouted at the closed door, "Even if you are doing this for his safety, this is still too much. Is there a need to surround this place with the sword array of South Stream Temple and even want to drive us away? This is the capital, not Mount Han. Even the Demon Lord would not dare to come here." This room was Chun Chongsheng's residence, but he was talking to Su Yurong. After a night, the disciples of South Stream Temple and the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy all knew that she had not left the room. The door was still closed, not pushed open, and no sound came out. Su Yurong sat at the desk by the window and looked at Chen Chongsheng, who was sleeping soundly on the bed. From time to time, she would stretch out her fingertips and gently rub away his wrinkled eyebrows from pain. The tong bao was gripped in her left hand, emitting a faint chi that formed a barrier that ensured that the sounds of the outside world would not disturb Qin Chongqing's rest. But she could hear Tang 36 words. She knew that her sudden return to the capital with the disciples of South Stream Temple was certain to incite much discussion and shock, but she did not care. She had the disciples of South Stream Temple surround this small building, and even wanted to drive Tang 36 and the others away. This seemed rather unreasonable, but this was because in Qin Chongqing's current situation, if he wanted true safety, it was best if he did not see anyone. She had separated him from Tang 36 and the others, which was a good thing for both sides. Seeing that the door was still closed, Tang 36 was a little annoyed. He turned around and walked downstairs. Walking out of the small building and onto the lawn, they walked past the sword wills that had yet to be released. Suddenly, they saw a middle-aged man standing under a tree by the lake. This middle-aged man's eyebrows were as thick as ink, his expression indifferent, and he exuded a somber aura. As his clothes swayed in the morning breeze, he faintly smelled of blood. Yi Shelian and the 10-some disciples of South Stream Temple stood in front of this middle-aged man, their expressions rather nervous, but they could not do anything to him, because he was the temple master's father, the divine general of the East, Su Shiji. You've returned to the capital? Why didn't you return to the estate and instead live here? You've truly lost all face for my Su clan. Su Shiji saw the unconcealable haggardness on his daughter's elegant face, but he did not feel any pity for her. On the contrary, he felt rather uncomfortable. Before leaving the estate, he had originally planned to speak as gently as possible, but his voice could not help but become cold, brimming with chilliness, like he was reprimanding her. The lawn by the lake was very quiet, the curtains blocking out the distant gazes, but the disciples of South Stream Temple had all heard these words and were displeased. Even if you are the Holy Maiden's father, how can you use this tone to speak? A few young female disciples, like Yi Xiaolian, regarded Su Yurong as holy and inviolable, like a god. With their minds slightly agitated, their sword intense and hostility gradually grew. Su Shiji felt this hostility and sword intent, then looked at his daughter standing silently by the lake. He found it even harder to restrain his anger. He yelled, "Don't tell me you still dare to kill your own father!" Su Yurong turned around, looked at her father, and said, "Father, what are you talking about?" Her voice was very calm, very light, and very indifferent, so this explanation did not sound like an explanation at all. Of course, it certainly did not sound like an apology. Su Shiji's complexion became even more unsightly as he recalled many things from the past. When she was very young, Su Yurong had always been personally raised by the Grand Minister. Neither he nor his wife could interfere. When she was 5, the blood of the true phoenix in Su Yurong's body awakened, and she was taken into the palace by the divine empress. Coincidentally, she also met the holy maiden who had come to the capital to view the mausoleum. As a result, she became the student of the 2 saints, so it was even less of his turn to educate her. The common people did not have a high evaluation of Su Shiji, but that was mainly because of his personal morality, such as his attitude towards the Tianhai family and his attitude towards Qin Chongqing. No one could deny that his ability was absolutely worthy of being a divine general of the Great Zhou. In the snowy plains of the north, he had achieved no small amount of military service. He governed the army with extreme strictness, and he governed the estate like he governed the army. Whether it was the deputy generals with special backgrounds in Snow Pass or the elders in the estate, they all kept quiet in front of him, not daring to oppose him in the slightest. Yet he could not control his own daughter, because he did not have the right. To any father, this fact would not bring any joy, but since the Su estate wanted to enjoy the glory and benefits brought by Su Yurong, it had to endure all this. But in the end, he was still her father and she was his daughter. He believed that she would at least give him some respect, just like she had for the past few years. But this morning, by the lake of the Orthodox Academy, he realized that his thoughts were just deceiving himself. What a good, unfilial daughter! Su Shurji's voice was as cold as ice. His right hand trembled as if it would strike Su Yorong's face in the next moment. Su Yorong calmly looked at her father. She naturally would not strike back. The eyes of the South Stream Temple disciples turned sharp, especially Yi Xiaolian and the other girls, who tightened their grips on their swords. At this moment, a skinny old man arrived at the scene. The sword array of South Stream Temple was of no use against this old man. It was not because this old man was very powerful, but because he was the chief eunuch of the great Zhou imperial palace, a close minister deeply trusted by the divine empress. Moreover, when he arrived, he held high an imperial decree. The empress says, "Do not let such a minor matter affect the relationship between you two, father and daughter." The chief eunuch expressionlessly said to Su Shurji. The divine empress's words were clearly meant for two people, but he only looked at Su Shurji. His meaning was naturally very clear. This was a warning. Su Shurji's complexion turned even more unsightly. He thought to himself, is this sort of rebellious action still a minor matter? Is she really my daughter, or is she the empress's daughter? He could only think these things in his heart. He could not reveal any of them on the surface, and even had to force his face to be somewhat calm. He glanced at Su Yorong and said nothing more. He turned and walked out of the Orthodox Academy. His back seemed rather dispirited, like an old lion that had been chased out of its pride. Su Yorong silently gazed at her father's back, her thoughts inscrutable. The chief eunuch turned to her, his expression instantly becoming somewhat more humble. He whispered, "The empress invites my lady into the palace." Su Yorong took the imperial decree and said, "Wait a moment for me. I don't know how to face her, and between the orthodoxy and her, I can't stand on her side." Chen Chongqing rejected the idea of entering the palace with Su Yorong. The her in this sentence naturally referred to the divine empress. Su Yorong said nothing. In truth, she was also keenly aware that if she brought Chen Chongqing into the palace, it would be an extremely risky matter. She knew that this saint, who had the heart of the world, and perhaps even more, had a condescending and indifferent attitude towards the emotions of the world. In these 2 years, the divine empress had not done anything to Chen Chongqing. Perhaps it was because she had to consider the Li Palace, or perhaps it was because she had never been able to confirm anything. Now, all sorts of clues were pointing to that unresolved case from 10 years ago. No one could guarantee what would happen if she met Chen Chongqing in the imperial palace. "You don't need to worry about me." Chen Chongqing saw her expression and knew what she was thinking. "Before entering the capital, you used the sacred light technique once. Last night, Martial Uncle used sacred water to bathe my body, adding another barrier. There shouldn't be any problems in the short term, and won't the sword array of South Stream Temple always be outside?" Su Yorong said nothing more and left. Standing by the window, Chen Chongqing watched her figure gradually fade into the distance. His expression turned somewhat heavy. He understood his current situation better than anyone else, better than her, better than the Pope. His meridians had all been burnt and severed by the star radiance and could not be repaired. His soul had seeped into his flesh and bones with his blood and could not be eliminated. His injuries seemed to have been suppressed, but his vitality was constantly flowing away. His body and fate had long ago been riddled with holes and in tatters. If it were anyone else, they would have long since lost their soul, but he still maintained his calm. He walked down the small building and headed for the Orthodox Academy on the other side of the cloth. Su Yorong was not present, so the disciples of South Stream Temple could not stop him from leaving. Although the sword array was terrifying, how could it fall on his body? There were many statues outside the main building of the Orthodox Academy, all of them still bearing the marks of that heaven-shaking catastrophe 10 years ago. The fountain had already been repaired, but the stone beast statues were still somewhat broken. He looked at Su Mou and said, "In the future, I might have to leave this place to you." He turned to Tang 36 and said, If possible, it would be best if we could delay our return to Winshu for a year. He then turned to Xianyuan Pa and said, "Don't always think that your injuries have healed. You still have to keep taking medicine." Finally, he turned to Zheshio and said, "I can't continue to treat you, but I will do my best to bring out the medical records as soon as possible. You absolutely cannot give up on your treatment. 3 days ago, I drove to Ichuan with a total of 4 friends. It truly was a long distance and very tiring, but I was very happy. I really recommend that everyone go out and have some fun. The beauty of rivers and mountains cannot be seen too vividly in books. Although work is busy and life is tiring, you absolutely cannot give up on enjoyment. The old saying is correct. Life should be wasted on beautiful things." Chapter 609. Su Mou and the others didn't know what to say. They looked into each other's eyes and realized that they still didn't know what to say. "Just what are you saying?" Tang 36 stared into Chun Chongqing's eyes. "I'm going to die, but I can probably live for another 20-some days." Chun Chongqing's voice was very calm, his expression very indifferent, as if he was describing an extremely ordinary matter. The sky wanted to rain, the mother wanted to marry. So who would collect the clothes on the roof? The fresh peppers soaked in the earthen jar were already pricked, so one shouldn't forget to add water to the sides of the jar. Otherwise, if the jar turned white, even the best pickles would have to be thrown away. He had heard from his elders that if the pickles turned white, they could be saved by putting in strong alcohol. But how could those pickles be called perfect? That pitch-black hole over there seemed like a thief's nest. It seemed like it really was going to rain. Silence, like a deathly stillness. All that could be heard was the sound of a fountain. After some time, Tang 36 finally spoke again. "What kind of joke are you playing?" They were all keenly aware that Chun Chongqing was the last person to joke, and he certainly wouldn't joke about this sort of matter. So their complexions were very unsightly. Seeing the expressions of the 4, for some reason, Chun Chongqing felt rather apologetic. Xianyuan Po's voice was somewhat trembling. "What's wrong?" Tang 36 and Zheshio had gone with him to Mount Han and knew that he had been heavily injured by the demon lord. They had watched him break into star condensation and then collapse, but they had no idea that the problem was so serious. Because Chun Chongqing did not say, they did not ask. Even now, they still did not ask what had happened, only looked at him. There were some matters that still needed to be explained, because only by explaining clearly could the confession be considered complete. Chun Chongqing looked at the 4 and said, "I have an illness that was brought out of my mother's womb. My meridians have always had problems. I knew a long time ago that I wouldn't live past 20, but I never told you. This is my fault. I originally thought that I could resolve this problem, but I didn't think that my illness would break out on Mount Han. My meridians would shatter and there would be no way to reconnect them, so I might die." "Just what do you want to say? Were those words just now your last words?" Tang 36's sword-like eyebrows arched as he taunted. "If you're sick, go find a doctor. What's the point in playing grief-stricken with us?" The taunt was only to conceal the unease and fear he felt upon hearing those words, as well as the inexplicable anger. "I am the best doctor." Chun Chongqing looked at him and explained. His voice was calm and his expression was sincere. He wasn't boasting, he was merely stating the facts. However, it was still the same as before, leaving others speechless. If it weren't for the special circumstances, perhaps Tang 36 would have made a rather intense reaction, but now he only remained silent. "Pope?" Zheshio suddenly asked. Chun Chongqing shook his head. Su Moyu said, "What about the Holy Maiden? Her sacred light technique can be said to be unparalleled in the world. So why can't she cure your illness?" Tang 36 also thought the same. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly remembered something and swallowed his words. In the 10,000 li journey back from Mount Han, he and Zheshio had seen with their own eyes that Su Yorong had not taken a single step away from Chun Chongqing's side. And then they thought about how, after returning to the capital. Suyurong had ignored those rumors and disregarded the face of the divine general of the East's estate to remain in the Orthodox Academy. This indicated that she had long known of this matter, and that she had no way of resolving it. The entire place fell into silence once more, and everyone's expressions turned extremely unsightly. Chun Chongqing apologetically said, "I'm sorry." Tang 36 could no longer suppress the emotions in his heart. Clenching his teeth, he coldly said, "You're going to die, so who are you apologizing to? Of all the things in the world, only death is one's own business. But I feel that there's a problem with your attitude." After learning of this shocking news, Zhexiu was the calmest. He looked into Chun Chongqing's eyes and said, "Since you're still alive, you can't think of yourself as a dead man. Even if you can only live these last few days with the thought that you're going to die, you still have to place the emphasis on that last word." Chun Chongqing understood what he meant. In the snowy plains of the north, Zhexiu, who had been driven away by the wolf tribe, had an evil illness, but he had still continued to fight. He had the most experience with this sort of thing. "Yes, but I still have to make some preparations ahead of time. There are a few things that need to be arranged." Chen Chongqing looked towards Tang 36 and said, "Yurong, she and I had an engagement. She was my fiancée, and although the engagement has been annulled and it seems that I have no way of marrying her, I will still treat her as my wife. However, the division of property was already clearly divided at the beginning of the year. I will organize a few things, and when the time comes, help me give them to her." Out of habit, Tang 36 wanted to say a few words of ridicule. For example, how could someone as poor as you have any valuable belongings? But in the end, he didn't say anything, only silently nodding his head. Chun Chongqing continued, "Luo Luo is my student. Leave 1/3 of my property for her, 1/3 for my senior, and 1/3 for the academy. Those students from poorer families can apply to use it. As for the two of you, I've given you swords, so I won't leave anything else." Zhixiu and Xian Yuanpo weren't wealthy, but with Tang 36 here, he didn't need to worry. "Orthodox Academy is really letting me take over?" Su Emoi said, "I'm a little uneasy because this burden is a little heavy." As he said this, he looked towards the distant students reading in the corridors of the building. Last autumn, the Orthodox Academy accepted over 100 new students. According to the rules of the Zhou dynasty and the Orthodoxy, these new students could no longer transfer to another academy. In other words, they had linked their fate with the fate of the Orthodox Academy. If Chun Chongsheng really did die, the Orthodox Academy naturally wouldn't have its current glory, so how long could it last? "Let me do it," Tang 36 expressionlessly said. "It can't be helped. I was born to be the main character. Besides, if the principal dies, I, the academy superintendent, will have to step in." Hearing this, Chun Chongqing was slightly surprised. After the long conversation by the lake, he knew better than anyone how much pressure Tang 36 was under. He lived a free life in the capital and in the Orthodox Academy, but as he grew up, the Wenshui Tangs would definitely ask him to return as soon as possible to inherit the family business. Tang 36 said, "Although that old man of mine isn't talented, he's still my old man. Besides, the old man's body seems to be pretty good, so there shouldn't be too much of a rush." Chun Chongqing knew that this was a lie. Even if the Wenshui Tangs weren't in a rush to raise a successor, they still weren't willing to see Tang 36 in danger and remain in the capital for a long time. "If you really do die, they should be able to understand if I return 2 years later," Tang 36 sternly said. "So you absolutely can't lie to me. When the time comes, you'll definitely die." This was naturally a joke, but it wasn't funny. It was very stiff, especially at a time like this. It was as stiff as an iced steam bun that had been left out for 2 nights, choking to the point of speechlessness. Su Emo, you looked at Chun Chongqing and said, "Relax, I'll stay behind to watch over him." Zhixiu said, "If you die, after I finish that matter, I'll return to the north." He was a wolf from the north. He would only occasionally stop in the bustling capital to treat his injuries. Once he recovered, he would naturally leave. But what matter did he want to finish? The mood was rather oppressive and heavy, and Jishio's words only added a chill. They all knew that before Jishio left the capital, he had to do one thing: kill Zhou Tong. Chen Chongqing was the first new student of the Orthodox Academy after 10-odd years. It was precisely because of him that the Orthodox Academy had been reborn. If one had to say what he couldn't let go of in the capital, besides those people, it was naturally this quiet and secluded academy. After he left this world, would the Orthodox Academy still be able to exist? Would it still be able to exist as it was now? Tang 36 and Su Mo Yu gave their promises. After Tang 36 promised to give him enough money, Jishio told Chen Chongqing that he could kill at any time for the Orthodox Academy and asked him to leave in peace. At that moment, Chen Chongqing felt that he should close his eyes and pretend that he had passed away. When they turned to Xianyuan Pa, wanting to know his plans, Xianyuan Pa suddenly said a few words and then left. The words he said were, "I'm leaving." Xianyuan Pa left very quickly, without the slightest hesitation or sloppiness. It was like someone was chasing after him, or like the Orthodox Academy was about to collapse. Is this the saying, "When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter"? After confirming that Xianyuan Pa had even taken the heavy black iron sword from the kitchen, Tang 36 sucked in a breath of cold air. Jishio expressionlessly said, "He's clearly in a hurry to return to White Emperor City." Tang 36 asked in confusion, "Why does he want to return to White Emperor City?" "To find Princess Luoluo and tell her that Chen Chongqing is about to die. Only Princess Luoluo can invite His Majesty the White Emperor to the capital to treat Chen Chongqing's illness." After saying this, Jishio turned to Chen Chongqing and continued, "You see, many people don't want you to die, and Princess Luoluo definitely doesn't want you to die either. And don't forget, you have to treat my illness. If you die, I might also die in 2 years, so it's best if you live." Chen Chongqing replied, "I will do my best." The heavenly Tao, or perhaps fate, had always been unfair and cruel to him, but this world was not bad to him. Many people were unwilling to see him leave, such as Luoluo, Xianyuan Pa, and Tang 36. And if he died, what would happen to Jishio? What would happen to the Black Dragon? Who would care about her? Just as he was thinking about these things, a guest came to the Orthodox Academy. This guest had an esteemed status, but it was also an enormous problem. If Su Yurong had not been summoned into the imperial palace and Chen Chongqing was still in the building, then he would definitely not have been able to meet with Prince Chenlu, much less speak with him. "You are really Zhao Ming." Sunlight seeped through the water of the fountain and fell upon Prince Chen Lu's handsome face, transforming into many motes of light that formed a complex design. It was just like his current expression, complex and sorrowful. In the past 2 years, Chen Chongqing and this representative of the Chen imperial clan had not met many times, but they had gotten along very well. He had not expected that this person would so directly ask this question. Chapter 610. I don't know. Chen Chongqing could not admit or deny it because even now he had not been able to confirm his origins. The only thing he could confirm was that he was also a member of the Chen imperial clan. To put it another way, he and the Prince Chenlu in front of him were brothers. From friends to brothers. This sort of feeling was rather strange. Perhaps Prince Chenlu had sensed his current mood, but he changed the topic. Ever since Crown Prince Zhaoming was born, his body has never been good. At the time, I was still young and lived in the imperial palace the entire time, but I never had the chance to see him. Chen Chongqing thought to himself, if I really am Crown Prince Zhaoming and my son will collapse in the divine empress's stomach, then my body naturally can't be too good. If you really were Crown Prince Zhaoming, what would you do? Prince Chen Lu's voice suddenly became light, but the gaze with which he gazed at Chen Chongqing began to blaze, brimming with hope and desire. Qin Chongxing did not know how to answer this question. Only at this moment did he suddenly understand that the most important aspect of Crown Prince Xiaoming's identity was he was the legal successor to the throne of the Great Zhou. No matter what the Divine Empress has done in these past few years, no matter how many elders of the imperial clan she has killed, there is one thing that cannot be denied. She is Emperor Xian's wife. Crown Prince Xiaoming is her son, and also Emperor Xian's son. If the throne of the Great Zhou is empty, there is no one more qualified than Crown Prince Xiaoming to sit on it. Prince Chen Lu stared into his eyes and spoke with extreme seriousness. Because Chen Chongxing had not admitted that he was Crown Prince Xiaoming, he did not directly say you, but Crown Prince Xiaoming. But his intentions had long since been made as clear as day, and anyone could understand. The Divine Empress had ruled for more than 200 years, managing the entire imperial court like an iron board. In these 10-odd years, through the use of several major cases and Zhou Tong's methods, the Chen imperial clan had been suppressed into an extremely miserable state. At present, it was impossible to see the slightest influence of the Chen imperial clan in the capital. At least on the surface, Prince Qinlu, the sole descendant, was only a sliver of face that the Divine Empress had left for the imperial clan, a bit of comfort for the common people. It was mostly just a symbol. He was completely like a lonely ghost without any strength. However, when they emerged from Tianliang County and possessed the world, they had produced Chen Xuanba, the former crown prince, and Emperor Taizong. The resources of the Qin imperial clan far surpassed the imagination of the common people. So how could they be so easily purged? They were assuredly concealing a great deal of strength in the capital. That strength might be hidden in the orthodoxy, the imperial court, or even the imperial palace. And in the counties outside the capital, the strength of the imperial clan was preserved rather well, even capable of shaking the imperial court. For example, in Tianliang County, if the Great Zhou truly did fall into turmoil, both the officials and the common people of the county would firmly stand on the side of the Chen imperial clan. The Chen imperial clan had several hundred descendants scattered throughout the various provinces and counties, each forming a faction. The strongest faction was the Prince of Xiang's faction. The Prince of Xiang was Prince Chen Lu's father. It was unknown whether the words that Prince Chen Lu said to Qin Chongxing had been approved by the Prince of Xiang, but had the right to speak on behalf of the Prince of Xiang. If Chen Chongxing really was Crown Prince Xiaoming and really wanted to ascend to the throne of the Great Zhou, obtaining the support of the Prince of Xiang's faction was an extremely important matter. Yet Chen Chongxing showed no reaction. Prince Chen Lu's eyes revealed regret and confusion. Who did not want the throne of the Great Zhou? Chen Chongxing did not want it, at least not now. He was in no mood to ponder these so-called major matters. This was the principle that there were no major matters before life and death. Prince Chen Lu could not remain in the Orthodox Academy for long. With the rumor that Chen Chongxing was Crown Prince Xiaoming, this sort of meeting had always been taboo. The Divine Empress's people were assuredly watching the Orthodox Academy, as that imperial decree from before was proof. He looked at Chen Chongxing and said, "Don't stand on the Empress's side because of your wrong. Don't be in a rush to make a decision. Watch more, think more, see just what my Great Zhou dynasty needs right now." Qin Chongxing gazed at his handsome face, at the unswerving determination on his brow, and thought back to the rumor that he had heard when he first entered the capital that the Empress regarded Prince Qinlu with great importance. He was rather confused. Prince Chen Lu seemed to know what he was thinking, and said, "The Empress treated me well, but she was wrong." Qin Chongxing did not ask who was right and wrong, because everyone had their own judgment of the situation in court over the last few years, and everyone had their own eyes. The Empress's mistake was not in using Zhou Yong, not in using Cheng Jun, not in using the so-called 8 tigers. As Prince Chen Lu spoke of the names of those famous treacherous officials, his expression became more solemn. The Empress's mistake was not in using the wrong people, not in using the wrong people, but in wanting to use these people, purposely using these people. She did not care about anyone's life or death, only about her own power and position. She put all her energy into the court, killing countless people that she thought were her enemies, but she forgot where the true enemies of my great Zhou dynasty were. The great Zhou was the legitimate dynasty of the human world, representing the fundamental interests of the entire human race. Its enemies were, of course, in the north, the demons. Look at the mountains and rivers of the last 200 years. The great Zhou dynasty is at its peak, but it has not advanced an inch in the north and has even lost many times. Its people are still bitterly suffering in the wind and snow, but they are still occasionally seized by the demons to be used as army rations. Why did such a situation occur? Because the Empress's thoughts were simply not placed there. Prince Chun-Lu looked into his eyes and harshly said, "No matter how high her cultivation, how powerful her strength, how outstanding her scheming, she is still a woman. Her vision and ability to plan are inherently lacking. She cannot lead us to victory in this war, so she has no right to continue sitting on the imperial throne." The sun gradually moved west. It was not yet dusk, but the sky was already tinged with a warm red. Chun Changsheng walked back to the side of the cloth, under the uneasy and hesitant gazes of the South Stream temple disciples. He climbed up the great banyan tree and stood on the tree's arm, gazing into the distance. The capital was shrouded in the early autumn sunlight. Black eaves and white walls could be seen everywhere. The streets were filled with people, and the streets were bustling with activity, peaceful and joyous. The people living here found it very difficult to imagine what sort of pressure the human armies endured in the snowy plains of the north, what sort of miserable days the people there lived. Just as the people living in the modern world had probably long forgotten, 1,000 years ago, the vanguard of the demon army had besieged Luoyang for 3 whole months, and the vanguard was only 400 li from the capital. Thinking of Prince Chun-Lu's previous words, he was silent for a very long time. Then he stopped thinking about it and began to think about his own matters. The great banyan tree was by the lake. The lake was in the Tradition Academy. There was green grass here. He had already lived here for more than 2 years. When he first came here, the name of the Tradition Academy engraved on the stone had been completely covered by ivy. This was the old garden that had been forgotten. Here he met the black goat and the granny from the palace. Later on, he saw the granny from afar in the imperial palace, but he had almost forgotten what she looked like. The bamboo carriage pulled by the black goat was not the granny's but MOU's. He had not seen MOU for a very long time. He had not smelled her scent on the bed for a very long time. Perhaps it was because of Suyurong. At the time, there was only him in the Tradition Academy. On the other side of the wall was the 100 herb garden. A little girl climbed over the wall, so the Tradition Academy had one more person. Then Xian Yuanpa came, Tang 36 came, and then Zhixiu and Su Mou came. After the recruitment last autumn, this place became even more lively. Thinking of the time he spent here with Luo, he felt like it was a lifetime ago. Xian Yuanpa had already left. He was probably madly running towards the Red River. If Luo knew, she would probably be very sad. Thinking of this, Qin Changsheng felt somewhat comforted. Then he realized that he could not achieve a heart as still as water. He still cared about some things. Tragedy was tearing a beautiful place to pieces for others to see. Sorrow was seeing a beautiful place but being unable to approach it. In the end, he was forced to turn and leave, never to be seen again. Looking at the capital under the autumn sun, thinking that he was about to leave this beautiful world, he officially began to feel sorrow. He looked into the distance and suddenly shouted twice. There was no specific meaning. He just shouted to prove his existence. The disciples of South Stream Temple and the students of the Tradition Academy looked at him on the great banyan tree. His figure seemed to melt into the sunlight. After hearing the shout, they were even more shocked. The disciples of South Stream Temple thought, how could the Holy Maiden like this kind of person? The students of the Tradition Academy thought, so the principal is this kind of person. Tang 36, Zhexiu, and Su Mou looked at him with grave expressions and heavy hearts. If you knew that you only had a few dozen days left to live, how would you spend this time? Would you make a wish list of the things you most wanted to do, and then sell your house and land to fulfill them one by one? Or would you hide in a dark corner of your room and wash your face with tears every day? Or would you disregard all moral rules and indulge the desires and evil in the depths of your heart? While Chen Changsheng was standing on the great banyan tree by the lake in the Tradition Academy, pondering this question, in the prison of the Department for Purging officials deep within the alley of the Northern Military Department, the former imperial physician, Lord Sun, and the former official of the Bureau of Rights, Lord Yang Xiushin, were also facing this question. However, they did not have the energy to think about how they would spend these next few days. They only wanted to reduce these days as much as possible. Ever since they had been secretly imprisoned in Zhou prison, they had wanted to die. The earlier they died, the better, because in this place, life was truly worse than death. The sharp iron wire was pierced into Yang Xiushin's left ear and then came out from the other side of his right ear, bringing out something similar to brain juice. However, there was not much blood. This was because he had already lost too much blood in the past few days, or perhaps it was because his hot blood had already gradually dissipated from the torture of the past few days. Chapter 611. His hot blood gradually dispersed. During the execution, it was very difficult to hear his powerful curses and recitation of the laws of the great Zhou, but Yang Xiushin's breath was still there. Although he was on the verge of death, exhaling more than he exhaled, his breath like gossamer, his bones were still hard, even though 10 some of his ribs had been broken long ago. Yang Xiushin had never participated in the grand examination. He had entered the court through the ordinary imperial examination to become an official, and only after many years of hard work did he obtain the divine empress's appreciation, allowing him to become a civil official of the palace. In everyone's view, he should be thanking the divine empress for her kindness, but he continued to act as he did in the past, quietly doing his own work, recording everything that happened in the imperial palace. Only in the autumn of the 4th year after the bloody incident of the Orthodox Academy did he suddenly submit a memorial. This memorial was directed at Zhou Tong, and at the end it also criticized the divine empress. The divine empress was very unhappy and had him imprisoned in Zhou prison. He suffered countless torments in prison, but he ultimately managed to endure and survive. In the end, he was pardoned, released, and transferred to the Bureau of Rights. That was a matter from 10 some years ago. 10 years later, he was once more imprisoned in Zhou prison. This time, there were no more colleagues in the court to cry out for him, and the divine empress seemed to have forgotten his existence. Zhou Tong looked through the bars at that mangled body lying on the grass. He squinted his eyes for a very long time before finally confirming that this was his greatest enemy from back then. Lord Yang truly is a loyal and chaste man. Even after suffering so much torture, you're still not willing to say a single word. Zhou Tong continued, but you're not the only one who knows of that matter back then. Hearing his voice, Yang Xiushin struggled to move on the grass. Dr. Sun has spoken. Zhou Tong stood up, clasped his hands behind his back, and walked out of the prison. I came today only to bid farewell to you. Hearing these words, Yang Xiushin's body tensed and then suddenly relaxed. He had persisted until now, and now he finally had a reason not to persist. Of course, this did not mean that he would say anything, only that he could rest. In the gloomy prison cell came the sound of heavy objects being moved. 10 some sacks filled with sand were carried in by the officials of the Department for Purging officials and then placed on Yang Xiushin's body. At the very start, Yang Xiushin's body would still twitch a few times and let out indistinct noises. Ultimately, His voice grew softer and softer until it stopped. Black, almost congealed blood seeped out from his eyes and nostrils. It was as if he wanted to see if there was a heavenly Tao in this world, if there was any justice. Even if he died, he still had to keep his eyes open, as if he wanted to see if there was a heavenly Tao in this world, and if there was any justice. The autumn sun set in the courtyard. There were no flowers on the crabapple tree, but it was still beautiful. Zhou Tong stood under the crabapple tree, his face slightly pale. It was probably because he hadn't seen the sun for many years. An official of the department for purging officials stood behind him, his body and mind so cold that not even the sunlight could warm him up. An official of the imperial court had died in Zhou prison. Logically speaking, this was a very normal matter. Similar matters had occurred many times before, but this official of the department for purging officials was Zhou Tong's most trusted subordinate and had followed him for several decades. He knew that this time was different from the past. In the past, those officials of the imperial court that had died in Zhou prison had not been properly tried. Logically speaking, this was a grave violation of the laws of Zhou, but it did not go against the divine empress's will. The divine empress did not want to see those officials again, so those officials would quietly die. But this time was different. He was keenly aware that Lord Zhou Tong was privately investigating something. The divine empress did not know of it, nor did she know of the news of Yang Xiuxin's death. He gazed at Zhou Tong, his gaze falling upon the crimson official's robe. He did not see the endless sea of blood or the monstrous killing intent as he normally did, but he faintly felt a sense of unease and even fear. Why was Lord Zhou Tong doing this? Just what did he want to know by taking the risk of the Empress' rage and secretly interrogating so many people? What is he afraid of? If Black Robe could be said to be the person with the most secrets in the world, then Zhou Tong could be said to be the person who grasped the most secrets in the world. To him, secrets were like gold and silver, or like power and status. The more he had, the better. The more he had, the safer he would feel. Starting from a year ago, he had begun to attempt to discover the secrets on Chen Chongqing's body, but alas, he had never made much progress. The only progress he had made was because it involved the imperial palace and was highly likely to discover the divine empress's secret, so he had been forced to stop. However, no one knew that he had always been secretly investigating. He was the person who had first suspected that Chen Chongqing was crowned Prince Xiaoming. The rumor that had suddenly spread through the capital last year had originally been deliberately spread by him. The secret that he most wanted to know was this matter. At the time he had only guessed, but he had not been able to confirm it because there were many areas that were difficult to understand. If Chen Chongqing really was crowned Prince Xiaoming, why had Shang Xingzhou sent him to the capital, to the Empress? The most dangerous place was the safest place. Moreover, Chen Chongqing's age did not match with Crown Prince Xiaoming's. On the contrary, that little fellow called Yu Rin did. When false becomes true, true becomes false. Everyone who had met Chen Chongqing said that he matured early, that he was calm and composed, and that he did not seem like a youth. Before Mei Lisha died, he was still reading the scroll of time. Many clues were gathered in this courtyard of blooming crabapple blossoms, and countless details gradually began to weave together in his mind. In the end, all of this pointed to an unbelievable deduction. Chen Chongqing was crowned Prince Xiaoming, and his age had been forcefully changed by the scroll of time. This deduction was too wild and inconceivable. He still found it impossible to believe, so he continued to investigate in secret. But he had searched through all the secret records of the palace and found nothing. He had secretly imprisoned many people who had been involved in this matter, including the midwife who had delivered the child and those old people of the Imperial Physician Bureau who had retired long ago. Only today did he finally confirm that when Crown Prince Xiaoming was born, the sun wheel in his body had already ruptured. If it were merely this discovery, it would not have moved him. This was because he knew that the Divine Empress had once defied the heavens and changed her fate. When she sacrificed herself to the starry sky, She had sworn an incomparably vicious oath that she was fated to die of old age, so she naturally could not leave behind any children. Before the inconspicuously moving yet irreversible heavenly Tao, Crown Prince Xiaoming would naturally die. But a few days ago he had seen a secret message between the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets and the Imperial Palace, and learned of another secret. Chen Chongsheng was a member of the Imperial clan, and he was sick. His illness originated from when he was still in his mother's womb. The sun wheel in his body had already ruptured, just like Crown Prince Xiaoming. Zhou Tong began to feel uneasy, even fearful. If Chen Chongsheng really was Crown Prince Xiaoming and he was still alive, what did that mean? It meant that the Divine Empress had not completely succeeded in changing her fate. As long as Chen Chongsheng was alive, the Divine Empress might suffer a backlash from the heavenly Tao. If this matter was used by those opponents hidden in the shadows, would the Divine Empress still be able to sit peacefully on the imperial throne? Zhou Tong was keenly aware of what sort of miserable end he would face if the Empress lost power. He was also loyal to the Empress, but he was different from Xue Xingchuan and the other divine generals. Those divine generals had armies under their command. If the Chen imperial clan regained the imperial throne, for the sake of stabilizing the situation, as long as those divine generals were willing to switch allegiances, they would absolutely not suffer any attacks. At the very least, there would be no problems for the next several years. But no one would permit him to live. Everyone knew that he was the Divine Empress's most loyal and craziest dog. He had bitten too many people to death for the Empress, shouldered too many debts of blood. He did not want to die. Even a dog had a desire to live out an ignoble existence. How could this matter be resolved? It seemed very simple. Just as many people thought, the Divine Empress only needed to kill Chen Chongsheng. In the eyes of everyone in the world, the Divine Empress was callous to the extreme and simply did not care about these matters. But Zhou Tong had followed the Empress for many years and knew that those legends among the people were not completely true. The Empress truly did not have a bloodline to pass down, and the Princess of Ping had been adopted. But when had she ever personally smothered her own son to death? In the end, the Empress was still a woman. If she really did discover that Chen Chongsheng was her own son and her heart softened, what would happen? Her heart could not be softened. She could not disregard the heavenly Tao. She could not take risks. Zhou Tong's complexion grew paler and paler. His red official's gown slightly trembled, stirring up bloody waves in the early autumn sun. Let me share the Empress's burden, he silently thought to himself. Chapter 612. If he really is Crown Prince Xiaoming, I think that there are probably many people who want him dead. Although those people might already know that he is about to die, my lady should be well aware that the lives of their clans and even the 1,000 generations of their clans depend on my lady. They will not take any risks, will not allow him to live another day. Su Yurong calmly continued. So I cannot leave the Orthodox Academy, and the sword array of South Stream Temple will never be lifted. The elegant celestial porcelain cup slowly turned between her fingers, like a water wheel being pushed by a stream, smooth and silent. The Divine Empress gazed at the cup between her fingers, revealing a smile that seemed to contain a deep meaning, but she said nothing. The celestial porcelain cup was very beautiful and seemed very hard, but to her, she only needed a thought to crush it into powder. Su Yurong had never hoped that the Divine Empress would save Chen Chongsheng, even if he might be her own son. Moreover, the Pope might not be able to do anything about Chen Chongsheng's illness, and the Empress might not be able to either. But she hoped that in the last years of Chen Chongsheng's life, he would be able to enjoy a beautiful and undisturbed period of time. From the age of 10, Chen Chongsheng had always endured the shadow of death, arduously advancing without any time to catch his breath. Every time she thought of this matter, she would feel somewhat sad. If my lady agrees, I will take him with me and leave the capital tomorrow, Su Yurong said to the Divine Empress. The Divine Empress's smile faded, her expression indifferent as she said, If he really is my son, then every day he lives is a day that I will be uneasy. Su Yurong replied, On the way back from Mount Han, I searched through all the scriptures of the church. There is no proof of the backlash of the heavenly Tao. That's because neither Emperor Taizu nor Taizong violated the oath they made back then. The former caused the death of all his children except Taizong, while the latter killed all those elders in the portraits in the Lingyan Pavilion. If not for Wang Jitse's quick escape, Taizong might really have been able to last through the autumn and for 10,000 generations, still sitting on my position. When she mentioned Taizu and Emperor Taizong, she was not very respectful, especially when she mentioned Emperor Taizong, who was revered by the people. Her tone was filled with ridicule and disdain. 2 years ago, when Chen Changsheng lit up his destined star in the library of the Tradition Academy, MOU and I were coincidentally on the Do platform. At that time I said destined star can also be the fated nemesis. If it is fated, between me and him, only one can live. Do you think the heavens will let him die, or me die? The Divine Empress's voice gradually grew cold. Su Yurong was well aware that before the heavenly Tao made its final judgment, the Empress would give an answer herself. The Divine Empress stood up and motioned for her not to say anything more. She walked to the window with her hands behind her back and gazed at the burning sky. Su Yurong also walked to the window and gazed at the bright red sky. She narrowed her eyes and subconsciously put her hands behind her back, looking at them from the back. Their postures were exactly the same, as if they were replicas. They also looked like a pair of mother and daughter. The Divine Empress said, No matter how you look at it, you are more like my daughter than Pingua. Pingua was the daughter she adopted from the family of Tianhai. Their blood relationship was very close, and their appearance was also somewhat similar. When she was young, she was one of the most famous beauties in the world. Su Yurong was now recognized as the most beautiful girl, but they were both extremely beautiful, but not alike. But just as she said, no matter how you look at it, Su Yurong looked like her own daughter. That was because their temperament, and spirit were similar. In reality, I have always treated you as my daughter because we have the same blood. The Divine Empress looked at the burning clouds in the sky. Her beautiful face shone with dazzling light. She was extremely confident. Back then, I sacrificed the starry sky to change my fate. I was willing to die without descendants to ascend to the throne. I have never regretted this, because I know very well that even the heavenly Tao cannot stop the rebirth of the phoenix. The burning cloud slowly moved west in the sky. It looked like a phoenix breaking out of the fire. You are my descendant, my successor. The Divine Empress looked at Su Yurong and said indifferently, As for whether he is my son or not, I don't care. Su Yurong thought, after all, he is your own flesh and blood. Don't you have any feelings for him? I taught you for so many years, but now it seems that teacher of yours has taught you back. The Divine Empress expressionlessly said, Feelings are the cheapest thing in the world. Morality is only an excuse for the weak to protect themselves. None of this is important. Su Yurong asked, Then what is the most important thing? The Divine Empress looked at the sky and leisurely said, Existence. Su Yurong thought for a while, then said, How should we exist? How to exist, each with its own wonders. Whether one can exist for a long time, how the soul cannot be extinguished, these are the great Tao. All things have a beginning and an end. Even those above the concealed divinity who have obtained great freedom will still be born and extinguished. Things are easy to decay, but their shadows cannot be extinguished. In the end, it all depends on the thickness of those marks. The Divine Empress turned around and looked at her. And those marks come from our footsteps, following the direction of our hearts. Su Yurong asked, What if someone blocks the path? The Divine Empress replied, So we need the ability to kill all those who block our path. Only in this way can we bring this world forward according to our will. branding our souls into history. Even if tens of thousands of people curse us, it will not be able to erase us. Only in this way can we approach true eternity. Su Yurong was somewhat confused. Frowning, she asked, "If everyone opposes it, how can we kill them all?" "Of course we can kill them all. This is a very simple matter." The Divine Empress's voice echoed through the empty palace hall. "First kill them all over there." She looked to the distant north, as if speaking to the year-round snowstorm. "Then kill them all over there." She looked to the distant west, as if making a declaration to the boundless ocean. "Then kill them all over there." She drew back her gaze and turned to a certain place in the capital. With her words, the trees lining the divine path of the Li Palace suddenly began to move despite the absence of wind. Countless green leaves rustled to the ground. "Finally, kill them all over there." She looked to the sky, her gaze very deep, as if she wanted to see through this burning sky. Twilight gradually retreated and night came. The restaurants outside the Orthodox Academy continued to close, and 100 Flowers Lane was very quiet. Only the occasional shouts from those peddlers could be heard. However, they had received a warning from the Orthodox Cavalry and knew that the Holy Maiden and the disciples of South Stream Temple were currently residing in the Orthodox Academy, so their shouts were very restrained and not loud. An old man selling gardenias borrowed the cover of the darkness to arrive in front of the walls of the Orthodox Academy. It seemed like he was about to relieve himself, but he suddenly vanished. The food delivery carriage of Clear Lake Restaurant entered the Orthodox Academy through the back gate. More midnight snacks than usual were carefully carried into the kitchen by the cooks for the students and disciples of South Stream Temple to eat at night. A middle-aged man delivering the food chatted with a cook and then vanished into the gray walls outside. Similar scenes occurred in many places, but no one paid any attention to them. There were a total of 14 people who had infiltrated the Orthodox Academy under the cover of the night. They were all assassins and killers. Besides the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets and Black Robe, in the entire continent, only the Department for Purging officials could find so many powerful assassins and killers in such a short amount of time. The female disciples of South Stream Temple had extremely high cultivations and powerful swordplay, and the sword array they had laid down was even more powerful. However, they were still disciples of the Taoist sect that cultivated in seclusion in the mountains, so they were extremely lacking in experience. Moreover, the walls of the Orthodox Academy were connected for 10 li. No matter how tight the patrols of the Orthodoxy cavalry were, they could not possibly control every single area. Not everyone in the Orthodox Academy had not noticed the infiltration of these assassins. Just when the old man selling gardenias arrived in front of the walls of the Orthodox Academy, Jishio opened his eyes. He was not in the building, but on the great banyan tree by the lake. During the day, Chun Chongsheng had given his last words, as well as many other things. Tang 36 and Su Moyu were very quiet. After Xianyuan ran away, Jishio said nothing. He climbed the tree, hugged the demon commander's banner sword, and began to sleep. Behind him was the sword array of South Stream Temple, and behind him was the small building. Chun Chongsheng was inside. If they wanted to kill Qin Chongsheng, they first had to get past him. In the Proclamation of Azure Sky, he was ranked second, the only young genius that could threaten Su Yurong's position. It was not because of his high cultivation, but because of his extremely powerful battle prowess. At present, in the Orthodox Academy, his cultivation was not the highest, but if magical artifacts and other items were not taken into account, not even Chun Chongsheng was a match for him. This was because he had lived in the desolate and dangerous snowy plains since he was a child, a wolf cub that had survived in the face of death. Last autumn, in front of the Orthodox Academy, Chun Chongsheng had broken through the star domain with a single strike, shocking everyone present. At the time, he had said that there were at least 5 people that could do what he had done, defeat a star condensation cultivator at Ethereal Opening. The 5 people he spoke of were Chiu Shanjun, Su Yurong, Gohanchi himself, and Jishio. Zheshio was extremely sensitive to danger. He expressionlessly gazed at the Orthodox Academy in the darkness. It did not take long for him to discover the traces of at least 7 assassins. However, what happened next was extremely strange, because those assassins began to collapse one by one. Some collapsed in the weeds, some collapsed in the depths of the forest. One assassin borrowed the water to escape, but sank never to rise again. Under the starlight, only a few faint smears of red could be seen in the lake. Only then did Zheshio realize that the Orthodox Academy was actually concealing so many experts. Although these experts were clearly friends and not enemies, they still made him feel a chill. A carriage stopped outside 100 Flowers Lane. The light in the carriage was very dim, illuminating the white paper on the table with a yellowish tint and the words on it with a bluish tint. The 2 officials of the Department for Purging Officials, on the other hand, grew paler and paler. Without question, ever since the Divine Empress had come to power, the government office in the alley of the Northern Military Department had become the most sinister and unbridled place in the entire continent. But tonight, the person that the Department for Purging Officials wanted to kill was not an ordinary person, but the future Pope. When they thought of this fact, these 2 officials still felt incomparably nervous and afraid. Not a single one of the assassins that had infiltrated the Orthodox Academy had returned. Even more terrifying was that not a single sound could be heard from the Orthodox Academy, as if no battle was taking place. The darkness enveloping the Orthodox Academy was like an abyss, noiselessly swallowing the lives of 10 some of the most extraordinary assassins of the Department for Purging Officials.